I need to make a 15-second countdown, but I'm too lazy to not use the free one that they give you. So we get a 30. But I heard the beauty of the 30-second countdown. It's so if there's an ad when the stream starts, you don't miss anything. So, guys, welcome today. I have my dear friend, I would say internet famous Taylor Talks Comics.
Ooh.
Right? Yeah, I feel like there's buzz about you. There's buzz about your channel, about your likes and dislikes. Like people respect your opinion. Versus me, they're like, "Oh, he's a beginner reader," but you got taste.
You've been reading for 2 years, I heard on the street.
Oh, okay, maybe a little longer than 2 years, but
I
yeah,
know. But yeah, sure. Thank you. I appreciate that. I've been on your channel before, so people should know who I am. But I'm Taylor of Taylor Talks Comics. This show we're doing tonight is more than a year in the making. I feel like
yeah.
one of the earliest conversations I had with Jake was on a post where I think I just very offhandedly said, Dark Knight Strikes Again is very much misunderstood. And then you replied like, hold on, we need to talk about that. What do you mean by that?
See, what I love about comics is like I'm not a gatekeeper. I'm not one of those people that thinks his opinion is the right one. I love disagreeing with people. And what I love is that me and you have completely different tastes in books. Yet on the Omnis this year, we both picked the same book as our favorite book of the year. You know what I mean? So in some ways, we're as different as can be. Ooh, is that okay? Let me spot that behind you. That looks like the graffiti design Ronin.
Yep.
And then the Batman Year One, and then the Frank Miller Daredevil Absolute.
Yeah, I really wish I could have put in the middle instead the Dark Knight Returns, so I could have had like nothing but Frank Miller art, but I don't own that one yet. Well, I meant the artist edition.
Yeah.
I own the Absolute. I mean, of course, I'm not gonna not own this masterpiece.
And if you don't own the Absolute like we do, we'll be doing a giveaway for a copy of Dark Knight Strikes Again. I asked our friend JP at OPB, I go, hey, me and Taylor are doing this show. Can we do a giveaway of Strikes Again? And he goes, sure. Is that like a trade paperback or something? And I go, basically. and then I go, I think it's only in print in an Absolute. And he goes, whatever.
I think this was your idea too a year ago. Again, totally my fault that this show's a year in the making because I've just been, I don't know. I'll get to that later. But when the reprint was coming out, I think it was like last February. You're like, hey, it'd be perfect timing if we did the show for the reprint. Maybe we could do a giveaway.
Yeah. And it's timing. But you know what? Why not? Let's do it now. Because now, not only is it in print, but also Dark Knight Master Race is in print. Mm-hmm. So it all works out. We'll highlight a couple quick chats really fast. Our friend Alexander Miller, me and him made a trade. So he's shipping me Daredevil Volume 1, which will complete my Daredevil collection. So that's fun. And then my new friend Mike.
Which cover did he get for that one?
I don't even know. I didn't even ask. I just saw the spine and it said Volume 1. And I go, I don't have that one.
I unfortunately have the Alex Ross cover, but
okay. I don't really even care. I think Bat Cato, did you get to read it today? I know you were trying to read it. And then our friend Alex, who is deciding between those purchases I told you about today, and then Transmet 3 went out of print, so he decided to prioritize getting Transmet 3. So yeah, breaking news came out today, already out of print at both distributors.
I'm super bummed about that because I need that, and I thought for sure it would linger on and be available for a few months. I was like,
it's gonna restock, dude. It's gonna restock.
I'm sure it will.
There's no way it won't. But he said, I'll be back in 5 minutes on the last 15 pages. So he was reading an amazing Thor omnibus. We'll have him tell us later which one it is. But I go, you gotta read it before the stream. You gotta read it.
I thought he was reading Dark Knight Strikes Again, like trying to catch up.
No, that is right now. He stopped reading Thor to read Strikes Again before the stream.
And he's awesome.
Finishing the last, and it was cool to talk with him today about it. And then shouts out to Joey talking about Dark Crisis. Okay, so this is my friend. I'm here, Jake, and I fixed my ribbons. And Taylor laughing because he probably saw that photo. I sent it in my comic book YouTube group chat.
What's funny, I was just sliding a book onto my shelf and I noticed one of my ribbons is out. On the originals. You ever read this by Dave Gibbons?
No, but I love Dave Gibbons. I that's awesome, man.
It's written and drawn by him. But my ribbon was
both.
My ribbon was hanging out on my shelf. And I was like, oh no, Jake's gonna be upset about that.
I don't even care, but I got eviscerated one time, which was probably the lightest roasting I've ever gotten on the internet. I've gotten some much less light roastings.
Was it on Reddit?
Yeah, of course.
Reddit's favorite thing to do is roast Jake.
Yeah. And then Bunkmaster saying, people should know who I am. Dang, Taylor coming in like a big dog.
Bunk, I missed a chance to be on a stream with him today. I had to work.
I feel like JP is going to cut Dark Knight Returns out of the absolute, so the winner only gets strikes again. Oh man, that's the Alex Ross cover, but at least we're cover twins.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's we got J-Man saying, I've read it 4 to 5 times. I did a live stream debating this book a few weeks ago. And the people are ready for your presentation. So
all right, well, before we start though,
go for it.
I know you read it today.
Yeah.
I would like you to, if you have any differing thoughts than your original thoughts when you first read it, hold those for a little bit later. But
yeah,
to start off with, just to set this all up, I think you even have a YouTube short on this. What were your initial thoughts when you read Dark Knight Returns again for the first time?
So I always tell people briefly that my history with Dark Knight Returns was very much like The Godfather, where everyone kept saying it was the best comic ever, it was the best movie ever, and I never wanted to read it or watch it because I felt like there was too much pressure. It could never be as good as what everyone said it was. And then Jordan goes, "You got to read it, man. Take my absolute." And I go, okay. And I read it in one sitting and it was like the greatest comic ever. And I text him and I go, wow, dude, there's still like half the book left. Is it all extras? And he goes, no, it's you got to keep reading, man. It gets better. And and that is, I went in blind. I had no idea what Strikes Again was. I had no idea that there was controversy, that it was different. And it is such a tone difference, and I feel like the problems with Strikes Again are one thing in a vacuum when it's just by itself, but coming from Returns, I feel like those problems are magnified because you go from something that I think was very cohesive to something that I feel like was very jumbled, you know, in terms of the writing.
Did you even know that there was like a gap of time between the two series?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I learned context over time, like a lot of like how, yeah. But at the time I knew that it was a sequel that came out a little bit later. Okay. And yeah, so I knew it wasn't like, oh, issue 5, 6, and 7. I knew it was like, there was a gap and it came back. So, I've since learned some context about it. There's some things I've heard about it, some things I'm not sure if they're rumors or true. But definitely, and I didn't even realize that there are also some pretty big gaps between issue 1 and issue 2 of Dark Knight Strikes Again. So definitely, was weird to go in without any of preconceived notion of it other than how good Returns was. But, definitely it's one experience reading it in a vacuum and another experience reading it immediately in the same sitting as Returns.
I know exactly what you mean by the Godfather thing. Cause like, I have that issue too when someone says like, "Oh, this is the best movie ever." I'm like, "Oh, like I kind of wish you wouldn't have told me that because now I have like these high expectations." I had a similar but opposite experience with All-Star Batman and Robin, which I'll get into a little bit because Frank Miller wrote that. I had a friend back in the day when I was working at McDonald's when it first hit trade paperback, and my friend was like, "This is the worst comic book I've ever read in my life. Like, not even just Batman comics, the worst comic." So I was like, no, it can't be that bad. So usually whenever someone says something like that bad, I kind of have like a intriguing, like, I don't know, interest in it. I'm like a morbid interest.
It's almost like a challenge because you think like that is such a lofty award, worst comic ever when comics like Trouble exist or something like that. You know what I mean? So like you almost think like you want to read it to prove them wrong.
And this was a friend that I really valued his opinion on comics. So I was like, hold on a second. So I read it in like one sitting and I was like, I kind of like parts of it. Like, it's not horrible. Like I can see what he means by it's horrible, but years since then, I think I actually like All-Star Batman and Robin a little bit more than the most people. But here's my point though, which leads into the presentation and everything, is that I think everything that Frank Miller ever did with DC, you know, starting back, you can even say like the Batman Christmas special, but really Dark Knight Returns all the way through tells one cohesive line and story. Obviously you'd have to like rearrange it to be chronological. So like Batman Year One, All-Star Batman, but I think it's the same character all the way through. And I don't think people understand that. And I don't think people are receptive to that because like they'll like, obviously Batman Year One and Dark Knight Returns are like held on like a hierarchy of like greatest comics of all time. And then you have All-Star Batman and Robin and Dark Knight Strikes Again, and people are like, those are awful. But I think if you read them as one piece, it really is the same character, especially.
Does that include the Batman and Spawn crossover?
Even that, and
Okay.
if you read that original collection of that, I don't know if the original single issue said this, but the original collection that came out in the 90s, it says this takes place in the Dark Knight Returns universe.
Oh,
so like Frank Miller
okay.
very intentionally made that part of the universe. So that would take place, I guess, before All-Star Batman and Robin. I think it's been a while since I read that. I don't know if Robin appears in that special or not. But
I know Jordan tried to make a long form video of chronological, like doing the whole the whole story of Frank Miller Batman, and then halfway through he was like, man, it was Superman having sex with mermaids and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't get the video done.
Superman Year One, I do feel like takes place in the same universe as well. That one I think gets a lot of flack. I think my biggest issue with that, as far as the response to it, is people hate JR's art, which I don't understand. I love JR's art.
I think it depends on, for me, what time period JR's art comes from. I think younger JR art versus current JR is very different, you know?
Yeah, I agree, but I feel like there's similarities. And now when I say this, I don't think they're on the same talent level. I love JR, but I'm gonna compare him to Jack Kirby. And whenever I do this, people are like, he's not Jack Kirby. I'm not saying that they're the same talent level, but things that people were saying about Jack Kirby in the 70s are very similar, almost identical criticisms that they have for JR's current art. And I think their careers kind of progress in a similar fashion. But in the 70s, Kirby he's inconsistent. In the 70s, people were like lambasting Kirby. Like if you go to the letters pages too, like they're collecting some of the omnibuses of that era. People were like saying like he can't draw anymore. His figures are terrible. Like all these things, his figures are blocky, square hands, square jaws. Like, but it was just Kirby doing the same thing he's always done, but just kind of like pushing it a little bit more. And I feel like JR, people are saying the same thing. His fingers and hands and everything's so blocky and disproportionate. And
yeah,
so I think it's similar. But I love it. I soak it up. The Superman Year One artwork I really do enjoy. The story, I think, wasn't the best. I feel like there was parts that lingered on too long and parts that could have been shortened and things like that. But we're not here to talk about Superman.
Yeah, we could tangent about this a lot, but I want you to stay on track because I know you put a lot of work into this.
Yeah. So, but I think so if we take that into consideration, especially for my presentation, that the same Batman we meet in Batman Year One, all the way through All-Star Batman and Robin and Spawn and Dark Knight Strikes Again and Dark Knight Master Race. The what's the JR? Speaking of which,
Golden Child?
No, the one shot before that.
Crusade?
The Last Crusade, yes. Which that takes place before Dark Knight Returns, which is kind of weird because it's collected in Master Race after the fact. But that story takes place right before because it tells you what happened to Jason Todd.
And then where does my personal fan fiction of what Gordon did in Chicago go?
What did Gordon do in Chicago?
Tell us, chat. If anyone knows, tell us what Gordon did in Chicago.
That was a loophole or a plot thread that I don't think Miller himself ever tapped into. He always talked about like Chicago is like this horrible thing he did. But one of the, just on the short topic of the Jason Todd thing, that's one thing that always fascinates me is that Dark Knight Returns came out before Death in the Family. And Dark Knight Returns talks about Jason Todd dying. And,
oh, wow.
And whenever they talk about, so you didn't know that timeline. So whenever they talk about Death in the Family, I always hear about like the phone survey and all these things about how Jim Starlin wanted to kill off Jason Todd because people hated him. But then DC was pushing back and saying like, but Robin sells Frisbees and kites and stuff. We can't have him dead. So like that. But it was weird but I never hear that connected. I never hear that like Jim Starlin was like, well, more talked about him dying in Dark Knight Returns, so let's have him die here. It's very weird to me that like that's never those dots are never connected as far as like the behind the scenes of that go. But it is
get a bunch of comments of people saying Crowbar Jake now because we're talking about Jason Todd. A lot of Crowbar Jake comments are going to come in.
Okay, so before I start the presentation, I want to talk about who I think Frank Miller is and everything, because I think that's part of the misconception as well, is that I think people, since he's held a high regard as this legendary artist and writer of comics, he obviously did Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One, Sin City, like all these things, his Daredevil run, all these things are like legendary, pinnacle, peak comics, and I agree with all that. But I feel like people put him under the microscope and under the lens as a typical monthly Marvel or DC artist or writer, which he's never been. He was that for Daredevil, but then after his Daredevil run, he was never the monthly guy. Everything he did, every series he worked on after that was like a confined thing. It was like Dark Knight Returns, this 4-issue thing, or Batman Year One, this 4-issue thing, or Sin City, like this long ongoing thing throughout the number of years, but it was never like this monthly comic. And Martha Washington, all these short projects that he worked on. Ronin.
I want to read Martha Washington. That book needs to come back in print, dude. Martha Washington book. I've heard nothing but good things about it.
It's a lot of fun, especially I think a lot of the political commentary of like today's age. I think
that was that with Gibbons, right? Dave Gibbons.
Yeah, and the Dave Gibbons artwork throughout there is amazing too. One thing I feel like fits in line with that, which I just recently found out, you've never seen RoboCop.
Yeah. I think I watched. Yeah, I don't think I've seen it. Like I think I've seen it where like the cop gets shot, but I don't think I've ever seen far enough to where he comes back as a robot.
You need to watch it because it's such a smart satire and the political commentary in that, and it's over the top violence. I think that actually informed Frank Miller, because I don't know if you knew this, but Frank Miller wrote the scripts for RoboCop 2 and 3.
Oh, okay.
Now they're not like the most popular or greatest things that he's ever written. There's a lot of pushback in the studio on what actually made it into the script. There's actually been comic book adaptations made of his actual scripts and what he intended them to be.
Wait, where's my gallery artist edition of his RoboCop scripts?
That'd be cool. But those comics exist. They're out of print though. Like I think Jose Rip or Juan Jose Rip, I forget that artist's name, did the artist for it.
RoboCop quotes, I'm assuming. Your move, creep. I'd buy
that
for
those are RoboCop. You need to watch RoboCop. You actually, it's a fun movie to watch with a friend too, because there's like some like over the top violence.
I don't have any of those.
You and Jordan can, one night watch it together.
Okay.
It's fun stuff. But I think that kind of satire and political commentary where it's like this over the top violence, over the top like exaggeration of what's happening in politics in a comedic, humorous way, I think is something that falls right in line with Frank Miller and how he views things. So yeah. I think he's an iconoclast, and I think he's like a little bit of a subversive genius in a little bit. So I don't put him in the same category as like these monthly artists and things. So I think when things come out like Dark Knight Strikes Again, people viewed it as like, oh, this is the next big Batman comic that like DC's putting out, when really it's the next big Frank Miller comic. And I feel like that's two totally different things. And so then when Frank Miller's doing these Marvel covers right now that, all the internet's raging about, every time a new one comes out, it's like Frank Miller's lost it. He's awful. Like, why do they keep paying him? I love those covers, by the way.
I don't mind a little bit of, I loved his, was it Master Race where he rotted up Superman? Like Superman's trousers. I don't mind a little bit of bulge. Gotta give the people what they want,
The freaking Absolute Master Race, the variant covers on that Absolute, there's like 200 pages of variant covers.
I don't know if you saw my Every Batman Absolute video, but like really cheekily, I slowly zoom in on Superman's bulge, and I was afraid I was going to get pushback comments, but no one ever said anything.
Everybody wants to see. That's what the internet needs.
Yeah, Man of Steel.
Right.
We got a quick comment though. 80s Batman was Miller's reaction to the tone of 60s and 70s Batman camp. 2000s Batman was his reaction to 90s attempt to ape the tone of Miller's 80s Batman.
Yes, there's a little bit of that going on too. And I know we talked about this on your show before about how like Alan Moore had this thing with Watchmen, and I think Frank Miller had a similar thing where I don't think Dark Knight Returns, I can't call it deconstructionist. Like people use that word. I think people use that word a little bit too loosely, but like Watchmen's deconstructionist, but Dark Knight Returns, I feel like is more of a commentary, which is a little bit different. But regardless,
either way, where they took the wrong lessons from, right, and kind of pushed the industry in a direction that the creator didn't intend.
Right, and I don't know that. I think Alan Moore was trying to deconstruct the superhero for people to build it back up on. I don't know if Frank Miller had the same intention with Dark Knight Returns. I think he was just trying to put out the coolest, awesome Batman comic that he wanted to, and he did it. He succeeded. But there was this reaction from Frank Miller, and this is just me, piecing things together from the interviews and things. I don't know. I've never asked the man. I'd love to meet him. But it seems like he is like the reaction coming out of Dark Knight Returns is what we saw after that was like the extreme 90s style, right? Like Image.
Sorry, can I ask a quick context question first? Just because I don't know. What came first, Year One or Dark Knight Returns? I don't know.
Dark Knight Returns.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Dark Knight Returns, was it? Because, okay, got it. Okay, so that came first.
Yeah. So he did Ronin first. So he left Marvel, his Daredevil run, and then he did Ronin, and that was the first like DC. Jeanette Kahn brought him in. Jeanette Kahn, I think, is one of the most underrated figures in comic book history. She's the publisher of DC for a number of years, but we don't get Watchmen without her. We don't get Dark Knight Returns without her. We don't get Vertigo comics without her. Like, she's such an important, and she came from book publishing, and she came in from book publishing with the idea that I forget which publisher she worked for. I think it was like Scholastic or something, but she had this mentality that you should have these projects on the list on the in the catalog that you expect to lose money on, but they're like these kind of artsy experimental projects that will either bring in a new audience with the artist or work on a new way of printing or new way of book, like things that you expect to take a loss on, but later might build in things that you do in the future. So Ronin was very much that. Ronin was this very much experimental project. It was 40 pages each issue, six issues. They're like these really nice prestige format, and it was totally a new character. It wasn't anything that DC owned, and it was Frank Miller owning the property still, like he owns the rights to it. And they brought him in, and she's basically like, Frank, what do you want to do? You could do anything you want. What would it be? And he's like, I want to do the cyberpunk samurai story. And it was amazing. I love Ronin. And it didn't do so well in sales. So then afterwards, it was kind of like, thank you you let me do that one for me. So now I'll do one for you. And they're like, what do you want to do for Batman?
Yeah.
And that's when he came out to Dark Knight Returns, and he, modeled the character after like this Clint Eastwood kind of fascist right-wing character, was what he modeled it after, and he wanted to do this story. It was totally new. It shocked the world. It shocked the comic book industry. It was like this whole fresh thing that they'd never seen before. They'd never seen Batman portrayed this way. They'd never seen a big two superhero comic book released in this format of these 4 issues out of continuity kind of thing. We never seen a superhero like aged like that, and it was like violent, and it was like weird format, but then all the page layouts were weird too, the 16 panel grids and things. Everything about it was new and fresh, and I think that shock was available to us as an audience, especially people that read like big 2 comics in the 80s. Not me, because I was born in the 80s, but I wasn't reading comics back then. But people
me either, in case the chat was wondering. I also wasn't.
But people that read it was a shock to their system. Now I think by the time Dark Knight Strikes Again comes out in 2001, so many years have come out. In between that, we have Image Comics come out. We have collected editions start to become a big thing. Prestige format's no longer a special thing. So it was hard for that to be a shocking thing like Dark Knight Returns. I think it's similar to, which you might be able to relate to this. I'm a huge fan of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I think it's like one of my favorite trilogies of all time. Now, the second movie, you'll hear people say like the first one's great. The second movie's all right. Now, I think a lot of that has to do with the shock factor wore off. So like the first one was shocking to everybody because it's like, who are these characters? Like, this is like a funny movie. It's amazing. It's brand new ideas, brand new characters, totally different than the rest of the MCU. And then the second movie was like, okay, we got more of the same. Yeah. Same thing I feel like with the Deadpool movies. I feel like the first Deadpool movie had that similar thing. It's like a rated R, funny, violent superhero movie. Like, we haven't seen this before. And then the second movie, you'll hear people be like, oh, it's all right. Because it was like more of the same kind of thing. So that's like kind of to set up the presentation a little bit. That's like, I don't think that shock factor was available to the audience because there's by that. And even today, I think it's even harder for someone to shock the system that way because there's so much variety in comics. Like you're talking about, we have different tastes in comics. There's so much variety.
Some of us like superheroes, other like, what's it, ceramic pots?
Yeah, clay pots. Yeah. There's so much variety out there, and we have access to so much variety in comics that like to have a comic come out that's like totally fresh and shocking, like Dark Knight Returns is almost impossible. I think and I think you'd agree with this part at least, Dark Knight Strikes Again, I think achieved a lot of shock factor. Whether that was well received or not, I think is another thing, but they definitely shocked the system a little bit. So that's my setup, is that I think a lot of the reception of it is like, we love Dark Knight Returns. Dark Knight Strikes Again is just like a little bit more of the same, but also like you're shocking me in ways that I don't think I'm ready for. Because if you look at Dark Knight Returns, like that artwork and stuff, still like some of those panels, like those characters still look kind of garish. Like they're like Catwoman. Look at Catwoman in those panels and tell me that's like a beautiful looking like Catwoman picture. Like it looks no different than the Frank Miller we're seeing on these covers today.
I don't know. I bet there's some creeps in the chat that were into it.
Well,
creeps in the chat, you know who you are.
I don't want to shame anybody, but
we accept all kinds of love here.
And I think there's an important aspect to Batman and how we perceive him as a character that I think allows me to accept Frank Miller's interpretation a little bit without being offended, and people that hold Batman in a higher regard may not be able to. So I have this quote. Jeff Clock wrote this about Dark Knight Returns or Dark Knight Strikes Again, and I let me see here. So it says we must accept Batman for who he is, or reject him, and if we reject him, we reject the whole genre. So if we accept Batman for who he is truly, which I feel like my views on him align more with what Frank Miller views him as, which is this fascist kind of psychopath. That's who I think Batman is truly. If we think about it, he's this guy. He has PTSD. His idea is to go out and start beating up people. And one of his ideas is to take a 9-year-old, which Robin was 9 years old when he first debuted, throw him into this weird leotard and start throwing him off of buildings as like kind of a shield for himself. Like, yeah, he's kind of a psychopath a little bit, and he takes the law into his own hands like a fascist. Now that might be people. I know people love Batman, and they're like, "How dare you call him a fascist? And how dare you call him a psychopath?" I understand. So it's like if you're not going to accept the Frank Miller Batman, then you have to reject the whole. Or if you're accepting him, then you're rejecting the whole genre of superheroes, or viewing it under this lens of like these not so great human beings. Now I do want to ask you, have you read Brat Pack?
I haven't, but I watched a like hour-long in-depth video on comic tropes that he did about it.
Okay, because you mentioned privately in a chat. You mentioned it the other day, and I was like, "Wait, Brat Pack's amazing. What do you think? What's wrong with Brat Pack?" Because he made some offhand joke about it.
Yeah, no, I haven't read it, but I watched like an hour-long in-depth breakdown of it.
You should read it, but I warn anybody that does read it, you will never be able to view superhero comics the same again, especially superheroes with sidekicks, because the whole thing's about sidekicks and how superheroes treat them poorly and things. Totally subversive.
As Omni Dog's Ward, trust me, it's true.
Totally subversive. Rick Veitch did an amazing job. I love that comic book. There's a whole universe built around it too that he's built now. But it definitely is kind of similar to what I'm talking about, like the fascist psychopath.
Is it like I haven't seen every episode, but like I know they touch on it a lot in like The Boys too, for instance, right? Like,
yeah, it was Brat Pack definitely is like The Boys before The Boys. The Boys came out and like, yeah, that's a good comparison. I think Brat Pack is a lot better. Personally,
I guess my thing is like, and we'll get to your presentation. I don't want to get on a tangent because I feel like this is the whole other video. Is that I like looking at the lens of, hey, the concept of a superhero and a child dressed almost in a homoerotic outfit, jumping off of buildings and endangering his lives. Like, these are not sane people. And I like that. I guess I like how Frank Miller does it, because at least I don't think he goes, even though it goes a little far. Like, sometimes I feel like from what I heard about Brat Pack or what I've seen in some episodes of The Boys is it goes too far. Like, you could make your point going up to 10. You don't need to go up to 15 on like the gross factor or like the sexual factor, or like, because at the end of the day, like, you can point the flaws of something and I'll admit the flaws, but I still love the medium that I love. You know what I mean? And definitely, I mean, the whole point of Batman is he's crazy. He stopped developing as a child, I feel like, you know what I mean? And it's crazy, and he would be crazy, and you know, he would be the goddamn Batman. I just feel like sometimes like other interpretations just go too far. Like, they take the wrong lessons from Watchmen, or they take the wrong lessons from Strikes Again, and they think that people want to, like, they turn it up to 15 on the gross factor or the sexual factor to make your point. But I feel like you don't need to be that exaggerated to make the point, you know?
Yeah. And The Boys was definitely a reactionary thing to Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns in the wrong direction, like you're saying, or at least my opinion.
Exactly what, yeah.
No, I will say Rick Veitch, who wrote and drew Brat Pack, also did the one, and he was doing the deconstructionist superhero thing before Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns. So I don't put him in the same camp. I think this was very much.
Did he do it before Miracle Man? Because that was like I feel like the earliest I've read that was deconstructing like the superhero side.
Well, Rick Veitch actually worked on that and Swamp Thing with Alan Moore.
Nice. Okay, cool.
So, yeah.
I think reading Miracle Man was the first Marvel book I ever bought, and it was, I knew it's not even fully Marvel, but like it was so cool because you feel like you get to see his early concepts that you feel like are further developed in Watchmen, like start to get, you know, explored in Miracle Man.
You go even further back than that and read his Captain Britain. It's Captain Britain. which I thought.
Oh my god, that's the comment I get. That is the one I get by that, and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen were the two I get every day. People going on my Alan Moore video going, "What? No Captain Britain?" And at this point, I almost don't want to read it because I don't want to let the comments win. But I've heard nothing but good things about it.
League is amazing. It's one of my favorite comics ever. But Captain Britain is like, it was such a startling discovery for me when I read it, because I was expecting it to be more straightforward superheroes that like is early in Alan Moore's career, like way early. So I was expecting, like, he's not there to push in the envelope just yet, like surely like it's just gonna be straight. But I read it, like when I was reading, I was like, no, he was pushing the envelope and deconstructing superheroes. Like that was like his initial thought almost. It was pretty wild, and that's a lot of fun too. It's not like, I know you kind of made a joke about how like you read so much Alan Moore in succession that it kind of like made you depressed or something, which is
me, yeah.
I totally can understand.
And I think I should have like been more smarter about like maybe read From Hell first and then do Tom Strong. You know what I mean? Like I was like that scene in Alice in Wonderland where one potion makes her big and small. I didn't go in the right order, if that makes any sense.
No, that totally makes sense.
What I like, yeah.
Captain Britain, it fits more in line with his top 10 Tom Strong stuff than it does.
Nice. Okay. Because what I like about Alan Moore is that people think, like, I feel like someone sees Watchmen and they go, "Oh, Alan Moore hates superheroes," but he loves them. He's reverent of them.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love is that, like, when I like I don't know, for instance, you've read Planetary, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so Planetary to me feels like such a love letter to the comic book medium.
Oh, totally.
And to me, I like, give me some deconstruction, but come from a place of like love and respect. When it gets too disgusting or when it almost feels like they're mocking my medium, I almost like, that's when it kind of turns me off a little bit.
100%. When I read The Boys, like when it was first coming out, I had the exact same reaction as what you're describing. I read it and I was like, okay, I get it, Garth Ennis, you hate superheroes. Like, I don't need to keep reading this.
So let's get the presentation, but let's answer this question first. Do you really think the writer and artist were making it intentionally homoerotic, your quote, Jake, in the original presentation, like Robin, for instance, in 1940s? No, I was more so talking about the Adam West TV show. I feel like there's definitely a vibe, like a subtle vibe.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but Frederick Wortham definitely thought so, and I think Frank Miller does talk about that in his within the story. Because there's that weird panel in Dark Knight Returns that I always cite, because people think like Dark Knight Returns or Dark Knight Strikes Again and Frank Miller's after that was like this guy that was like shitting on comics, the medium almost. It was like he was almost like pissed off at it or something. But they're like Dark Knight Returns, like they hold it on this pedestal. Like there's still some weird moments in that comic that people don't understand. Like there's the moment where Batman is like naked and Carrie Kelly jumps on him and he's like embracing her. And she's like 16 years old at this time. It's like,
whoa, she's 16. She's 16 in Strikes Again. So she's got to be younger in Returns.
Well, okay, well then even weirder.
Yeah.
And so it's like, again, same character. If we take that Batman all the way through, like the through line of Frank Miller, like he was never like this great guy.
I feel like he's a little nicer to the Robin in Returns than he is in All-Star Batman and Robin, the Boy Wonder.
Well, right. But I think that's a reaction because of how he treated Dick Grayson and then Jason Todd dying. I think he was almost like, I have to do it right this time. And and he was nicer to Carrie
Kelly. But also, Robin couldn't cut the mustard. So,
yes.
And everyone chat hashtag cut the mustard to be entered to win an absolute of Dark Knight Strikes Again.
This beautiful book right here, which collects Dark Knight Returns and Dark Knight Strikes Again.
So I'll do hashtag cut the mustard.
But there's all those moments in Dark Knight Returns where he's constantly saying like, if you do this, or if you don't do this, you'll get fired. Or if you do this wrong, you'll get fired. And then
she doesn't let me type it because it thinks it's spam. Okay, it looks like it's going in. Cool, it's working. There we go. You got it. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let me open up the StreamYard giveaway thing so it starts collecting comments while we do our thing. We'll do the giveaway at the end so you guys can't win it and then leave. But I'm sure you all want to stay around and hear this insightful presentation if we ever stop tangenting, because I feel like you got to plan it. I don't want to. Yeah.
Up to we're not talking about offhand things, right?
Yeah,
we're not talking about Claypot Comics.
Yeah, no, we're not. Oh my gosh, why is it not opening? Where's? Oh, here we go. Giveaway page. Choose live stream. Hashtag.
Everybody, while he's getting this ready, make sure you hit that like button
or dislike button. It's cool.
Yeah. And if
Yeah.
you're watching this on the replay, comment down below. I always reply to all comments, especially on live streams that I appear on. So if you comment after the fact, I'll reply to you, and you can tell me I'm crazy after my presentation or whatever you want to say.
And if you're subscribed to the Brave and the Boys and not Taylor Talks Comics, fix that too, people.
Yes.
Subscribe to my boy Taylor. Are we on the road to 3,000? Is that next?
Yes, 3,000. I'm about 120 shy. So
Nice.
I want to get there. So if you appreciate my thoughts or my views on these things, or if you don't, and you want to just hate watching,
if you appreciate my thoughts, even though I feel like I don't have thoughts, I'm just gonna try to instigate Taylor.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen now.
And we got 22 people watching, but only 5 have entered the cut the mustard.
Oh, that's not cool. Come on, people. Hashtag cut the mustard.
If you don't want a free absolute, that's cool, you know.
All right, so we have well, that's not what I wanted to do here. In defense
Both
of
channels are a must sub. Oh.
In defense of DKSA. So I'm actually gonna. You let me know if anybody makes a comment. Like, you can stop me at any time, and if someone's making a comment.
Yeah, but I want to, you know, I want to focus on the presentation. Like, if it's someone being like, "Hey, what pizza should I get tonight?" You know, I'll try to do things related to the presentation.
Well, of course, but I want this to be a free flowing conversation too. So if people have comments about any of the stuff I say, I'd like, you know, I don't mind them talking about it in real time. So in defense of DKSA, that's the whole setup here. I'm going to break this into 3 parts. So we have inspiration, the inspiration for this project from Frank Miller, the art, and the story. I feel like that's like the 3 pieces here.
Which, can we talk also about like political and historical context at the time of him writing? Because I feel like, to me, that was something that I learned a lot more this time reading, was like, I felt like it was like he had a lot to say in the writing, you know. Would that be inspiration?
Not how I have it set up. I do have a moment in the story that talks about that, because I think the one important moment you're referring to is 9/11. 9/11 happens,
and I also feel like the if I wasn't mistaken, I got like traces of like bitterness towards like the Patriot Act and the nanny state that we became, and how we gave up freedoms and the need of security. So all of that together, I feel like, was what he, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And so as far as the 9/11 comic or moment goes, that happened. I don't know. I can't remember a publishing date, but I know he had finished issue 2 before 9/11 happened. And then there was a delay.
I thought it was issue 1.
No, it was 2, because 2 has an opening scene where flying the bat plane or bat whatever flies into the building. And that was one thing that Frank Miller was like regretted, or was like made him uncomfortable, because he already did that before 9/11, but then like the issue came out. So there's a delay between 2 and 3, and I think that's why 3 is a little bit different than the rest of this. But regardless, so inspiration, art, and story. So the first part, inspiration, we're gonna be talking about what inspired the project. So this was like mind blowing for me when I read this. So this is a page out of the Absolute Edition, and I cropped it. The above it says like, special thanks to these people for Dark Knight Returns, and then Dark Knight Strikes Again has this special thanks, and I recognized some of these names. I was like, holy crap, things kind of make sense now where he was coming from. So we have Frank Miller, he was doing this, writing this and drawing this, you know, early 2000, 2001, 2002 is when this whole project's being made. Now that's 14 years removed from Dark Knight Returns, 13, 14 years. After that, Frank Miller had done like Sin City, Elektra Strikes Again, or no, Elektra Lives Again, I think. Sorry, it came out after that. Martha Washington came out during this time. He worked on RoboCop 2 and 3. Like, all these things happened all throughout the 90s. Now, in the late 90s, early 2000s, Frank Miller was very much into the small press independent comics scene. And that's where a lot of these names come from. So before I set this up, I want to Frank Miller has always been an artist and writer that's worn his inspirations on his sleeve in every project he's worked on. So one of his first earliest inspirations was Neil Adams. He was actually a mentor of Frank Miller. Frank Miller actually tells a great story. He tells this a lot of times. So if you watch a lot of interviews with him, you'll hear it. But about how Neil Adams was his mentor, and he would go into Neil Adams' office once a week when he was trying to break into the business and show like sample pages of all the art he's working on.
So that's why the coloring in Strikes Again sucks, right? I'm just kidding.
That's an interesting point. Neil Adams also worked on digital coloring, which will lead into that.
So I know some of the panels just look like he got, I don't know if it was him or the colorer who did the coloring, but like someone just got drunk and was like, Photoshop has new tools.
Well, Lynn Varley did the coloring. She's also the colorist on Dark Knight Returns.
Okay.
Right. So that's kind of a mind-blowing thing, which we'll get into. But he'd go into Neil Adams' office once a week with sample pages, and every week he'd say that Neil Adams was like, you suck, you're never gonna make it into this business. But every week he'd get it a little bit better. And then finally he earned
That's my relationship on YouTube with OmniDog, in case anyone was wondering.
That's funny. But eventually Neil Adams accepted him and he was brought into it, and he started doing Spider-Man comics.
And he earned that, it sounds like. He definitely
earned
that.
And he like wanted it so badly. So now the Daredevil run, you'll see a lot of this inspiration of Neil Adams. Another artist.
I just read all the Frank Miller Daredevil. I don't have the Electro Omnibus, but I'm going to try to hunt that down.
Oh yeah. The Electro Omnibus is different because there is Frank Miller art in there, but Bill Sienkiewicz, though, who I was going to say, which is kind of a nice segue, is another artist that had like Neil Adams as mentor. And you look up those, you read those early Bill Sienkiewicz comics, like Moon Knight comics. He had a very much a Neil Adams style, very much similar to Frank Miller and Daredevil, the early Daredevil issues. But then they kind of go off onto their own and become their own. So it's almost like Neil Adams, like you have to learn the rules of making comics and figure drawing before you can break the rules. And Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz are two artists that were mentored by that, learned those rules, and then veered off in completely different directions as far as their art goes and their own signature styles.
We got our first question from an international viewer, so this might be context he needs to understand the story. In Strikes Again, there's a saying in all their issues referencing San Francisco. A character will complain about a foreigner, and they'll say, yes, I'm from San Francisco. Is that a stereotype from San Francisco?
I don't know if I picked up on that part. They do reference San Francisco as like the Silicon Valley kind of tech industry of it, but I don't.
Okay.
And there are stereotypes I think of like homosexual community in San Francisco. I think that's always been like a kind of derogatory. Yeah. I don't know if that's what he's referencing or not.
Okay. I know there's a lot of issues with technology in, I feel like, Strikes Again. So it could be the Silicon Valley side. It could be
but another artist that he had as inspiration was Will Eisner. Always cites Will Eisner as an inspiration for his career and his artwork and things. So here's a spear page. These aren't like homages or anything. It's just two similar pictures that I saw. But
how stoked are we for the Spirit Darwin Cook artist edition? Like that. Oh my god! I feel like we haven't geeked out about that yet. But
it's not even an artist edition. It's just a absolute edition, really.
Oh really? Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's like the Color Comics that came out, but it's gonna be.
I didn't watch the interview. I just saw the news.
I ate that interview up. Scott didn't beer and
I feel like you asked like 50 questions. I feel like Omar should have just had you do the interview.
I was going to do the interview with Scott Dembier about the his previous book that he worked on, because it was when Omar, his dad passed. I guess that's public knowledge. I can say that, but and I was going to fill in for him, but I couldn't make it work with my schedule, so Dom did it. But I'd love to talk to Scott Dembier. But no, it's going to be like an absolute edition, so it's going to be like the Color Comics oversized into a slipcase.
Awesome.
Same size as the Scott Dembier. I don't know if you know, but he was like kind of the proprietor of the absolute edition. He put the first one together.
I love him. Chad, if you haven't noticed, I completed my absolute collection today.
Good little segue there for you. Do you know what the first absolute was?
Authority.
Was it Authority?
That's where the name comes from. So each one was going to be, the first one was Absolute Authority.
I knew it started with an A because it was alliteration. But...
And the second one was going to be Perfect Promethea, I believe. Yeah. And then they just called them all Absolutes.
Right. That was, okay. I remember it started with an A because of that story.
Yep.
All right. So then when he goes into Ronin.
And Aquaman doesn't have an Absolute edition and never will.
Man, what would be the story? Like, what would be the definitive?
The Jabberjaw crossover when they did the Hanna-Barbera crossovers.
That'd be good. I kind of wish they'd do a Hanna-Barbera omnibus. That's what I want to see.
We got the deluxe edition of Flintstones, which I love, but that's basically all we've got. And I loved all that stuff because I was raised on Boomerang as a kid.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay, so now we go into his Ronin phase. So Ronin, have you read Ronin? I know you have the absolute, but I don't know if you've gotten
So
to
I
it yet.
started it right at like I think the worst comic book burnout I've ever experienced last year when I was like, I didn't do a single page of reading for myself. Everything was
Okay.
like an utter that I was turning into content. You know what I mean? Like, and I started reading Ronin and I loved the beginning of the first issue because I thought it was a samurai story. And then it like, I didn't know it was Samurai Jack. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I get to like the second portion of either the first issue or the second issue, and it just looked like tech garbage. And I was
This
like, yeah. And I just go, nah. and I haven't read past that, but I'm gonna try to read some tomorrow before my absolute video. I
that's
was
so funny
given the
that
absolute as a gift by a dear friend, so that
that's
was
so
really, really
funny
nice
because I
of
had a
him.
similar reaction in my teen years. I was going through a Frank Miller phase, and I read it, and I was like soaking up the samurai story of it, and then it got into like the cyberpunk story, and I was like, wait a minute,
I
like this. I was
think
like,
I
this looks
think it
cool, but I want more of the samurai stuff.
I will say you might agree with this. It's I'm probably going to get a richer experience reading Ronin now that I've read his Daredevil, right?
That
Like,
too, and I think I know you own the Incal. I
yeah.
think if you read the Incal, you would see where his inspiration was. Because that's what I'm talking about right here. So he had
Okay.
two major inspirations for Ronin. One of them was Goseki Kojima of Lone Wolf and Cub, which we will see on the left here. On the right is his artwork from Ronin. You can see very similar
Why am
styles.
I getting like the vibe that he's the Quentin Tarantino of comics?
I compare him to a very much so. He wears his influences on his sleeve, very just like Quentin Tarantino does. If you
Yeah.
know the movies, if you know Quentin Tarantino's biography and you know the movies that he was into, his whole entire catalog makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the other half of the Ronin story is a cyberpunk story. So on the left, we'll see some Mobius artwork. This is from The Long Tomorrow. Also, Mobius was the artist on the Incal, which
Do
is
you
another.
think I should read the Incal before I read Ronin, or does it
I
not
don't think
matter?
I don't think you have to, but I think it
But
would
will it? Yeah. Will I
it
get
would
a
make
better
more sense
experience?
for what he
Okay.
was going for, I guess. In that story, Lynn Varley was also the colorist on Ronin, and she does an amazing job of like separating the two between the samurai story and the cyberpunk side, because there's like 800 years between the two eras of the story. And she does a great job with her colors, where you're never lost as far as what era you're in, and then they merge together eventually. But that's what he's going for there. So he had this new project on Ronin. He had these two artists, like mostly heavy metal, but very specifically Mobius, and then Goseki Kojima, Alone with a Cub. Now this is early '80s. This is before manga really was coming into the States, and he's on record saying that he would pick up the Japanese, not translated, like the Japanese reading of Lone Wolf and Cub, but he was able to read it because the cartooning was so good that he was able to pick up on the artwwork and read the entire story without needing to read the words. So that's
Frank
the style
Miller
we're
reads
going from there.
comics in the same way I do. I'm just kidding.
And then we get to Sin City. Now the picture on the left is Jose Munoz doing his Alex Sinner stories, and you can see how it's like that page looks like it's from Sin City.
Yeah.
You don't get Sin City without Jose Munoz.
Dude, I gotta read Sin City. Is the library edition still in print? Like, what's
Yeah,
the
they are.
format to get it in? Because
Well,
I've never looked into getting them.
They were both recently printed in two different formats. The affordable paperbacks, which are like I think $25 cover price.
That
Really
doesn't sound like me, Taylor.
but the absolute editions or slipcase editions are like $100 a piece cover price, and there's 7
Not me
volumes.
opening a tab to make an order during this interview.
There's 7 volumes. I want to own those. I've owned Sin City in a number of different formats. I actually don't own any Sin City right now currently, which is kind of sad since I'm a huge Frank Miller fan. But I want to hunt down and track those slipcases down. I think they're all still in print. But so now we're back to this. So again, all leading up to Dark Knight Strikes Again, he wears his influences on his sleeves. Now let's read some of these influences and figure out what their artwork looks like and why this makes sense. As far as
I like this comment though. I feel dumb. You're not dumb. I never put the Mobius inspiration and Ronin connection together, but it's so obvious now. And then Sin City was Frank's debut as a director, if I'm not mistaken. Because he co-directed
the movie, yes, absolutely, yeah. And then he directed the Spirit movie, which was kind of the Dark Knight Strikes Again of his film career because it was very much garish and over the top and people.
Wow, Taylor, I'm enjoying this so far, buddy. Seeing the inspirations and connecting the dots. Great job so far.
Hey, thank you.
And the Taman does a lot of research. He read a lot of books. I was like, I chatted him. I go, should I be reading these things too? Like, cause he felt like he read all of Frank Miller Batman. And I was like, you know what? I'll read his Daredevil run. That'll be that and Strikes Again. That'll be the research I do.
My entire January, I read nothing but Frank Miller comics. I looked at my Goodreads, and literally all of January is just Frank Miller comics.
Did
not
you
even
survive,
just
or did it break you?
I think it made me a bigger Frank Miller fan, to be honest.
I love that.
Yeah, I think I just ate it up, and I was just like, I couldn't put another one down. I want to pick up the next one. But my entire January, it was preparation for this. That's why it's a year in the making, because I knew I needed to. I am passionate about this topic, and I wanted to put in the forethought and the research and everything together. So now we're back to this. This is, again, the thank you page. It's in the back of the Absolute, his inspirations for these things. We're not going to go through all these names, because some of them, like Lorenzo Di Venatura, is like a film producer. Like, none of it, but the comic book people are.
I don't see his mentor on that list.
Who's that?
Didn't you say Neil Adams was his mentor and was kind of hard on him, and he grew to get his respect? I don't see that on his list.
Right, but this is just the people that inspired him for just this one project.
I know, yeah.
Yes. Although Neil Adams wasn't in the Dark Knight Returns, thank you, because right above this, I said I cropped this photo. Like same page, right above it is this Dark Knight Returns inspirations, and it's like,
I was just trying to stir the pot to be instigative.
Oh no, you're fine. Hey, Frank Miller's a pot stirrer. It makes sense. But like I said, he spent the late 90s, early 2000s going to SPX, Small Press Expo, reading the clay pot comics that I love, like self-published things. So up first, we're going to have Kyle Baker. If you don't know Kyle Baker, he did a lot of crazy things in his time. One of my favorite cartoonists. He has worked in a number of different styles. He worked on The Shadow, was one of his first projects that was pretty big. Plastic Man, I have shown here. There's a big deluxe edition of the Plastic Man that came out. Do you have that one?
No.
Jake? It's the rubber banded edition.
Okay, cool.
And it comes with
I've never seen that before.
It actually comes with a rubber band.
Sick.
Around the book, but a lot of fun stuff in there. And it came out a couple years ago. It won 8 Eisner and Harvey Awards, it says.
Wow. Only
regardless.
8?
Oh, good.
I said only 8. Like,
all right. So I just put a cover from his Plastic Man next to a picture of Plastic Man inside Dark Knight Returns, or Dark Knight Strikes Again. I'm sorry. Another one was James Kochalka. This one is the one that when I read this, I was like, holy crap. Dark Knight Strikes Again makes so much more sense in my eyes now. I don't know if you know James Kochalka or not. Here's one of his comics called Super Bleepers. He does a lot of kids comics too nowadays. Obviously this one's not, but he does. And he has like this, you can see his figure drawing and the colors and things are just like this.
This looks great. When did this come out? Because I feel like this looks like cartoon shows or things that I saw on like early YouTube or like Cartoon Network. And like this looks like, if this was like a while ago, that's crazy that this is like what I felt like became like the norm almost.
I think this predated like Adventure Time and those kinds of that era of Cartoon Network.
Yeah. If
I'm not mistaken, I'll check it real fast because
Google the word super fuckers and let's see what pops up.
I'm not going to do that. 2005 to 2007 is when it came out.
Speaking of which, we still only have 7 entries for hashtag cut the mustard to get a absolute edition of Dark Knight Strikes Again. And I get it. People, maybe Taylor needs to convince you that you even want it on your shelf. So maybe that's why you're not entering.
Is that United States only or is it worldwide?
Yeah, United States. I'm sorry, guys.
Okay.
We're a small business.
No, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
So we have James Kochalka. Another one was Tony Millionaire was on this list. Tony Millionaire is another cartoonist of the small press. This is just a picture of Tony Millionaire doing Batman.
Why does this make me feel stressed?
This picture?
Yeah, I don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable.
I like that his bat ears. It actually looks like bat ears. Like it's like the inside of the ear.
Oh, they look hairy.
Yeah.
But again, this is art that made me feel something.
Yeah. Another one was Bone. He cites Jeff Smith, which I think if you're in Dark Knight Strikes Again, if you like those little Green Lantern characters eventually look like the Bone character, the Bone cousins, right?
I'm excited. Jordan for Christmas bought me the new Kickstarter of Bone. I've never read it, but it's the origin of our friendship was I got hired at his Best Buy and he posted on Instagram a photo of the Bone collected edition. And I go, you should have bought the color edition. but he because I hadn't read Bone, I didn't realize he bought the colored edition, and that started our friendship.
Oh,
trying to one up him on a comic I didn't even read.
that's a nice origin story, though. I like that.
Yeah.
Another one is Paul Pope. Have you read Batman Year 100?
I haven't, but I feel like I've seen images from this book before.
Yeah, so Paul Pope, if you're familiar with Paul Pope comics, the way he draws his faces and things totally makes sense when you look at Frank Miller's faces.
I think there was a deluxe of this, but I think it might be gone now.
Yeah, I think it's out of print. But Paul Pope is an amazing cartoonist. I love him. Another one is Bill Sienkiewicz. He worked with Bill Sienkiewicz on Elektra Assassin, and that came out the same. That was coming out, I think, concurrently with Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One. I think because an 8-issue series, and that is an amazing series. The art, if you want to see someone push the envelope of what comic book art can be, Bill Sienkiewicz is a master, and he does an amazing job in those 8 issues. And word has it that they were working like kind of Marvel method, to where like artist, where Frank Miller writes a synopsis, like a little one-word paragraph of this issue, and then the artist goes and does all the artwork, and then Frank Miller would go and fill in the words later. Stan Lee invented this method back in the day. But apparently when he got the art back from Bill Sienkiewicz, he's like, this is crazy. This is way different than I imagined him for my script. I'm going to have to change things. So like the art actually changed the direction that Frank Miller is going with the script. But a lot of the same story themes and stuff were in there too, as far as like anti-authority or not trusting the government or what the government's actually telling you kind of things that we'll see in the Dark Knight Return or Dark Knight Strikes Again. Another inspiration that wasn't cited on the list that we talked about earlier from the Absolute Edition, but these were things that I found in interviews and things. This is R. Crumb's artwork, underground cartoonist, one of the most famous underground cartoonists ever. But this cartooning style, some people call it like Bigfoot cartooning style, which you can see obviously as big feet. But the whole point of cartooning in its purest essence is pushing the figure to exaggerate and tell the story within the art. So you might have a big hulking figure in the story on the page, but like they're just trying to convey that this character is very gigantic and big, but not actually gigantic, but just like bigger than everybody else. Like he feels bigger. It's like like Kingpin in the Spider-Verse movie.
Yeah, how he's just like
a big black blob kind of, that was inspired by Bill Sienkiewicz's Kingpin in the Daredevil story they did together, Love and War, I think it's called. They totally inspired and ripped from the pages of Sienkiewicz's figure drawing of Kingpin. Again, he's a big giant Hulk, but he's not actually big. It's just like that's the way to telling the story without telling you, showing you, not telling you kind of thing.
Yeah.
That kind of purest essence of cartooning, I think, is what we see in Frank Miller's art that I think people don't like. I think people that want like the Stuart Immonen clones of your typical monthly Marvel DC comics want the figures to look exactly the way they are supposed to look, like humans. I don't feel that way. I much prefer my figure drawing to be like I like Rob Liefeld. I like Jack Kirby. I like Frank Miller, JR. I like these guys that push the figure to tell the story kind of thing. And that brings us to the king. Can't do a stream without talking about Jack Kirby. So Frank Miller,
we made it an hour before you mentioned him, so that's got to be
that might be a record. But you can't cite Frank Miller without Jack Kirby. Frank Miller, even the inspiration behind his career choices were very much inspired by Jack Kirby and how he was not treated so well in the comic book industry, but also his art style. You see, like on the character that would become Orion in the middle there, or Light Ray, sorry, with the blocky fingers on these guys' hands, like all those things are things that people cite in some of Frank Miller's drawings that are like, that's stupid. Like the big hands too, like the thumbnail for this live stream has the big giant kryptonite gloves that Batman's wearing, right?
Yeah.
With the hands that are like the size of, I don't know, a television that like a big box TV from back in the day. But again, pushing the figure to tell the story. So those are all the inspiration. That's what's building up to the story itself. Now we're going to talk about the art. This is something that I know in the clip that you have on your YouTube shorts where you were on Omnidog's. I don't know if it's Omnidog's show or if he's on your show. Yeah. You're talking about how you read Dark Knight Strikes Again and how garish it was.
Yes, which is the word I learned from him.
Oh, okay. Was he talking about this story in general when he?
No, he was talking. What do you think? he's famous for it, but calling the Neil Adams recoloring garish was when I first heard the word garish.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'm trying to remember where my slides are. Okay, so for the art style, very much different than Dark Knight Returns, right? But we have to you have to have some sort of grace. I think a lot of things people were expecting in Dark Knight Returns Part 2, like they wanted to be exactly the same, but a continuation of. You're not going to get that with Frank Miller. You might get that from, again, Frank Miller was not your monthly comic book guy that works for Marvel DC. He's not like, it's not like you hear Dan Slott's going to be back on Spider-Man. So, and this isn't a denigration. It's two different types of careers. But you hear like Dan Slott's going to come back on Spider-Man or like Chris Claremont's going to be back on X-Men. You expect it to be more of the same, like a little bit different probably, but more of the same. Like it's not going to be too drastically different, right? But Frank Miller has never done the same project twice. He's always pushing things. So here's the first couple pages of Dark Knight Strikes Again, where we're seeing these panels. It's not the 16 panel grid, the nice tight grid we get from Dark Knight Returns, right? These panels are all over the place. Like what the hell's going on here? We even see like a silhouette of Batman behind it. Like there's a silhouette of his fist at one point.
Yeah.
We see like close-ups of lips. Like what's going on here? So this was going on in the early 2000s. Now, Jake, I know you're much younger than I am, but I don't know what your frequency was on the internet back then. But in the early 2000s was like the time of like GeoCities. Like if anybody remembers like the website era of like when people could make their own websites and they looked like this. Oh, here's a picture of the question. Like this.
That picture is dope though.
Right. It's just like loud, like colors, like bombastic, like these panels all.
I guess my earliest experience, which I know is probably like a decade past what you're talking about, was people getting funky with their MySpace pages.
It's okay. It's similar to that because what we were seeing back then was GeoCities. This is what websites looked like back then. Like just like this madness, like like just like stabbing you in the eye, overly colored, like things everywhere.
It's overstimulating for me. Like
100%. Like it looks like this is too much, right?
Yeah.
But I think that was part of the inspiration of what we were getting with these kinds of pages was that like he was like, this is what things look like. Because if we look back at Dark Knight Returns, he was doing a commentary on what things looked like back then. So like CNN, like the 24-hour news cycle was, I think, just kicking in at that point. But regardless, like the talking heads on news channels was a big thing back then. But it was still like this very much structured grid of like your television. But now it's like all over the place, like GeoCities. Like this is like nonsense. Like how do you even?
Sorry, I guess my question for context is it because like was it supposed to be an accurate representation of what technology looked like then, or what he assumed technology was gonna look like in a few years?
Well, see, and it's a great question because I think there's a little bit of both going on in the story. I think the panel layouts of those early things is very much of what's happening now, but there are things that we'll see in the story, which I'll get to, that I feel like he correctly predicted things that would happen that are happening current day. I think Dark Knight Strikes Again actually ages better if you read it now than it did back then. I don't know that people give it a chance because like the outcry that when it happening in real time, they don't even give it a chance to reread it. But I think if you read it in 2025 eyes, you'll be like, wow, he kind of correctly predicted things a little bit, which I love about science fiction in general. Is like when you read like a 1950s comic and they're like, wow, they predicted like the smartphone 50 years ago. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, look at these. This is nonsense.
Let's also do a quick chat really fast.
Go ahead.
Dark Knight Returns was a response to Silver Age stuff. He made it serious and gritty, but Strikes Again is a response to the 90s stuff. Big weapons, crazy curvy girls. So he made it more like Silver Age. And then our friend Next Imaginaut says, yes, hypersaturation is the media aesthetic term you're reaching for.
Yes, that's a great way to say it. Thank you. Next Imaginaut's always great with words.
Oh my God, he's a linguist.
He is very much so. Oversaturated, I think, is part of it. I think it's like kind of the lexicon, the zeitgeist that he was trying to tap into.
Yeah. Okay, now you're sneaking in some big words to fit in.
I was trying to match
his level. I know.
Yes.
Sometimes I'll chat him on Discord and he'll write me like this essay full of the biggest words I've ever read, and I go, "Okay, cool, yes," and I'm like, I don't mean to be curt. I just don't even attempt to be on his level.
But you feel almost guilty. You're like, man, he put a lot of work into that comment.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to like write.
That's how I feel right now, seeing how much work he put into this presentation. I'm like, I could have read some more Frank Miller.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine.
But I'm the observer. I'm the audience member. I'm the eyes of the audience member.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Which is totally the way I wanted this to be anyways. I just wanted to, talk about what I feel about this, and then you tell me if I'm crazy.
I feel like this website's secretly a little pervy, but you don't know that until like late, until you get deeper into the website. Yeah,
like this one is like the most, like this is what, and like you open a website and it's like screaming at you with all these ads and pop-ups and like music playing and like it's just craziness. So one thing I want to talk about too is like the Lynn Varley coloring. So Lynn Varley, one of the greatest comic book colorists of all time. She worked on Dark Knight Returns. She worked on Ronin. I'm leaving out another project that she worked on with Frank Miller. I forget. It wasn't Batman Year One, but regardless, one of the greatest colors. Oh, 300, obviously. She painted the colors for that. One of the greatest colors of all time. So what the hell happened with Dark Knight Strikes Again? Well, I think what happened was that she, kind of like what you described earlier, is like Lynn Varley got a hold of digital coloring and then started using every tool she found. Yeah, she just went loose on it. It was like, oh, this tool is cool. I'm going to use this tool over here. I think if Lynn Varley had worked with digital coloring for like 4 or 5 years prior to Dark Knight Strikes Again, I think it would look a little better. Because I like I said, I love Dark Knight Strikes Again, but it's not a perfect comic, and I think the coloring is probably one of the worst aspects of it.
I almost wanted to save an image of something, but I felt like there were actual moments in the book where there was like pixel smear in the coloring of the images.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you'll see examples I'm going to show you here that you can cite.
To me, that was like, that feels like, I feel like it's easy to call any flaw character, but to me, sometimes it's just a flaw, you know?
And that's fair. And I think, again, they're trying to go for that oversaturated look of like what we're seeing with the GeoCities examples here. But also, I think it was Lynn Varley using these tools for the first time. And I think they were a little bit, might have also been like, they thought this was the direction comics were going for digital coloring, because digital coloring was still a pretty new thing.
Sort of like George Lucas overdoing CGI in Star Wars, thinking that was the future of movies.
Yeah, absolutely. A very similar thing. Like, I think
like he was like, yo, Jar Jar is going to change movies forever.
Yeah,
and
exactly. I think they're
not,
right. They were like, this is where comics are going. Let's get on the foreground of it. And then, because I mean, Dark Knight Returns and Ronin were some of the first painted comics we saw in America. So it's like they were on the forefront of that. They just maybe missed here. So now, one thing that they've released in DC is the Noir edition of Dark Knight Strikes Again. So I'm going to show you some examples here to show you what this comic would look like without color. Now, it's not a perfect version of it, because you can see on this example here, and you'll see some more, like the Earth there, the Superman, it's totally gone in the second picture.
Yeah.
Because
so he didn't even draw the Earth at all. He completely left it up to the colorist,
100%.
Varley.
And there's so many aspects, which we'll see, where it was just the colorist kind of drawing backgrounds for him. Which I kind of wish that this was a black and white comic. I kind of wish Frank Miller just said, screw your big two comics where you feel like they always have to be color.
I feel like that wouldn't fit the oversaturation side of like flashing screens and color on your screens and like all that stuff. Like, I feel like you're right. If you're saying that the point of it was to be what media and technology and all that stuff was like online, like, it's, I get it, but you're right. It might be better black and white. Like, honestly, like sometimes when I was reading Chuck Dixon's Nightwing, and my friend said, hey, maybe you don't have a problem with Scott McDaniel's art. Maybe it's the 90s coloring that you're not used to. So I went to my iPad because I was reading digitally, and I turned it into black and white mode. And I binged through Chuck Dixon's Nightwing, and I liked Scott McDaniel's art a lot more without the coloring. So like, I've experienced that before with certain comics.
Yeah, totally. I love that story, that example. So now they released, and it's a hardcover. It's oversized. This Dark Knight Strikes Again Noir edition. I do wish that you could almost release this as a black and white comic though originally. And he was just like, I'm the Sin City guy. I do black and white comics now. Screw your colors, and released it this way, because then he would have drawn things like the Earth here that he's floating above, and you'll see some of these other pictures where like totally things, the pages don't make sense anymore because there's no color.
Alex brought this up to me today. He sent me some pictures and go, do you think Frank Miller drew that? So he said, I was suspect that certain backgrounds weren't Frank Miller. I was curious if he just briefly penciled them in and had someone else do it, but this clears it up.
Oh, awesome. And you can see here, like the big hands, big feet that I talked about earlier too, like the pushing the boundaries of the figure. Here's another example. Here's the question shot that you talked about earlier. That was really cool. Which I think the color works. The background of the color is some of that blurry digitized stuff that you're which I don't think
Aurora
works the
Borealis
best,
looking thing.
but then look in the black and white edition. Like this looks like a ripped out of Sin City for sure. And
Yeah.
I love that picture. Like there's nothing wrong with it at all. Here's another one that I think this one works in color just fine. I think some of the flatness of the colors perfectly fine. But again, black and white.
I don't like how like I mean, I get maybe they're trying to do a lighting thing, but like the people in the background, how it looks faded out or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's like I think Lynn Varley would have done that differently. But that, I mean, you see that in some comics where like background characters will be
just looks ugly.
Who?
I feel like Wonder Woman's face, even in the black and white edition, just looks ugly.
I don't know that she looked well. It's like kind of like the Catwoman thing I was talking about, Dark Knight Returns. And again, like this is 2001 Frank Miller. People talk about how his Marvel covers now are ugly people. Like,
and we get a nice little bulge on Captain Marvel.
Oh yes, we do. Here's another picture that I feel like the bottom half of the page works well in color. I'm not the biggest fan of the top part with Green Arrow. But and again, like some of the flames around the skeleton and thing, but like still black and white example. Here's one that totally does not work though. So this is Lara using her laser vision. That bottom panel, you can't even tell what's happening in that. Like the top panel is okay, you can see someone shooting something out of their eyes, but the bottom panel, like it was totally left up to Lynn Varley to figure that one out.
Okay, I was double checking. That looks just like the photo example that Alex sent me today. The one he sent me was Batman on the scaffolding, and you see the Bat logo up in the sky, and it's all like colored lights. There we go. That's the one. That's the one Alex sent me today to ask.
Look at that.
So there we go. So I like that. You know,
everything on the right there is what Frank Miller drew. The rest of it was.
So he did draw the Bat logo. Okay, that's interesting.
He did, yeah. Lynn Varley just changed the color on that, but again, this page, it doesn't not work, but it's also kind of like, what the hell's happening? I think it works better with the idea of what Lynn Varley was doing. But again, if this is just black and white comic, I think it would have worked better, in my opinion. Or if Lynn Varley had like
Luthor is gnarly in this book.
That was another thing I wanted. So this is kind of the pushing the figure drawing. Look how big his hands are. Like, I do love that he's wearing Chucks and he looks like this monstrous thing. But to me, like this is him using cartooning in the purest essence. Like Luthor is typically presented as this handsome, bold, rich guy, right? But he's like actually a monster though. Like
he's like an ogre in this book. I feel like the only thing that would have made this better is if it was the same shoes that Godzilla wore in that Charles Barkley comic you told me about, where Luthor got busy. But
it's kind of like, have you seen Shallow Hal, the Jack Black movie?
Yeah.
Okay, so I kind of view it like that, to where like Shallow Hal, he views people by their inner beauty or how they really are.
Yeah.
So it's like this is Lex Luthor as like truly deep inside he is like this ogreish monster that's like this evil human being.
I feel like if you were to Google a photo of what like the 7 deadly sins demon greed would look like, or gluttony, this is what would pop up.
So again, it's that kind of cartooning thing. Like this is how he views Lex Luthor in his purest form. Maybe he's not.
I feel like it needs something to show the wealth though. Like he needs a monocle or like a Rolex or something.
Or maybe instead of like Chucks, he'd have like really
Louis Vuittons,
expensive like Jordans on or something.
Yeah. Giant gold chain. That's what it with an L on it.
Oh yes. So this is another example of all these talking heads that we see. And again, him using like all these different styles of cartooning, which is really fun to see, in my opinion. See Frank Miller working all these different styles, kind of like mimicking different artists and things. Here's him on the right. We see like the manga, like almost like Ghost in the Shell cartoony version, like almost chibi version of Ghost in the Shell on the right with super manga giant big news, she calls it.
Also, okay, this brings up one point for me. Did you feel like in every single scene or every single issue, was it Catgirl or Catwoman? What's her name? Catgirl?
Catgirl.
Did you feel like her costume was completely different in every single page or every single issue? Like sometimes it had stripes, sometimes I felt like it didn't. Like I feel like her costume kept changing.
Oh, it's definitely an evolution of her costume for sure. Yeah.
Got it.
I think it's consistent within the issues though. I think like issue 1, it's like leopard print. And then issue 2, she wears like, she doesn't have like the full over the head mask kind of thing. And
how much time was supposed to take place between the story?
I think
like in terms of in the story
of Dark Knight Returns.
Strikes Again. How much time did those 3 issues, like in the story, how much time was supposed to have progressed in that time? Do we ever get a clear answer?
I don't think so. I don't think it's a lot though. Like there's 3 years.
I feel like everything moves so quickly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like a rapid which is one of the fun things about the comic, in my opinion. It's like it's every page is like it's moving. Like it's like there's a lot of energy to that story. But I know there's 3 years between Dark Knight Returns and Dark Knight Strikes Again, but I don't think like the full story from like issue 1 to issue 3 of Dark Knight Strikes Again. I don't think we know. I assume it's just a few months though. The way I viewed it. Up here too on top of this page, you see Alfred E. Newman, which is fun. I got him in the background here. Mad Magazine. Okay, now we're gonna get to the story. Are you ready? Do you have anything to say about the art though before we move on?
I want to hear the story portion. I guess for me, that my problem with the story and art in conjunction together is that it felt hard to follow and verging on convoluted, to where like if you're gonna have the art be so exaggerated and different and hard to follow, make the story a little more concise. Or if you're gonna have the story be so bonkers and wild, have the panel to panel, because I felt like by the like people kept popping in and distracting, and maybe that's supposed to be like, I don't know, like the internet age where you always get distracted by things, but I just felt like I just kept getting like not confused, but it just was, everything was so hard to follow. Reading this book today felt like a fever dream. You know what I mean? Like it feels like a brief, like I don't know, like some hallucinogen you take that lasts for 10 seconds, you know what I mean? And you try to capture everything that you experienced, but it's all so quick and different and wild that for me, part of it was hard to follow.
I don't disagree with you at all, but I think that's kind of one of the things that I love about it. Like honestly, which I totally understand if people don't love that about it. I'm not saying that you're wrong or anything, but like I love that about it. Like that's one of the things I love about like Jack Kirby in the 70s was like every single page he's like introducing all these new ideas and new concepts, and it's like it's almost too much at times, but it's just like eating it up. And like every time I go back and reread Kirby in the 70s or go back and reread this story, it's like I pick up new things from it. And I love rereading comics too. I think reading them in different context or different times of your life, you could pull different things from it. This most recent reading of Dark Knight Returns and Dark Knight Strikes Again, I didn't realize how funny these comics were. Like there's so much humor in these comics that I don't think people realize. And I think that's something that Frank Miller was doing. And I think it's like people like see it as like this dark, gritty story, but like there's a lot of like humor in these stories. That's kind of like Frank Miller's having fun and like kind of like joking and like so there's like different things you pull from it. Another reason why I wish I think they solicited it or rumored it. I wanted to come out though, like a Frank Miller Batman omnibus, where it has his entire works of Batman in one under one cover. So I think reading in that context of like from beginning to end, like Batman Year One all the way through Golden Child, I think would be such a fun reading experience that I don't think anybody has like truly done. Like I think most readers of these stories have read like, oh, I read Dark Knight Returns, I read Batman Year One, like, you know, haphazardly, like within years apart and different orders and things. But to read them like in order, I think is a different context that I think would be a lot of fun.
In the same way that like reading Strikes Again by itself was completely different than when I went from Returns to Strikes Again.
Yes, absolutely. So like different context, I think would be fun. So here's the story. This is what
to answer your question. Yes, it sucks so bad. But what doesn't suck is winning a free absolute. # cut the mustard.
Yes, type # cut the mustard into the comments right now, and then into the show we'll draw, and you can win a free
continental United States because we're a small business.
Yes, if you're in the U.S., a free absolute edition of Dark Knight, the Absolute Dark Knight, which includes Dark Knight Returns and Dark Knight Strikes Again.
And if you still don't feel convinced or changed, which is awesome, just watch the first half. Read the first half of the Absolute. You don't have to read the second.
I do want to hear people's thoughts though. The whole point of Jake, obviously, I'm going to hear your thoughts, and then the chat after I go through all this. If you think I'm crazy or if I enlightened you on some sort of aspect that you didn't pick up on, I want to hear all that. So here's the last panel of Dark Knight Returns. This is where we left off, right? We see Bruce Wayne here, who's presumed dead by the public, but he's alive, obviously. He's got Carrie Kelly there, and then a lot of the mutants around him.
Yeah, she's not 16 in that picture.
No, I don't know how she's 14, maybe. I don't know, but he's obviously pushing 60. We got some creepiness going on here. Now we're getting into Dark Knight Strikes Again. So we get
it's just ugly to me. And the whole like, I don't know. I felt icky swallowing the atom, but I guess that's the humor you were talking about.
I thought it was funny. I thought
she's like, sorry, I threw you up. That wasn't very professional.
And she's just like, I gotta put you somewhere. I gotta get out of here. So the story opens up.
She's 13 and 16 and strikes again.
Oh, here we go. So she's Catgirl now. So we've seen evolution of the character, which again, that aspect that you see throughout the Frank Miller stories, I think is fun because you don't get a lot of that in Big Two comics.
She wants to be Catgirl, but he just still calls her Robin. I feel like.
Well, yeah,
but like Robin to him, which I thought was an interesting relationship.
The Big Two comics, we'll see like Sam Wilson will go from Falcon to Captain America, and like we see this sometimes, but it takes years. But this is like fast moving. We actually see these characters progress in a natural way. You can see why Robin, when she grows up, she wants to be Catgirl or those kinds of things. So we have Catgirl, and then we also have the Bat Boys or Bat Gang, the mutant gang turned into Batman's mercenaries. And then we've got the Atom, which I feel like the opening sequence is amazing. The artwork in that was awesome. I love that.
None of my problems with the story or the writing have to do with issue 1.
Okay. Well, just to set it up. So we got Catgirl, the Bat Boys, we got Atom, we got Flash, Plastic Man, and Elongated, which awesome that they're teaming up. And we have freaking Green Arrow with a robotic arm. So this is a team that we've assembled. I'm on board already. What a great cast of characters we have. Like, so much fun going on there. We have the continuity of Green Arrow, who's missing an arm in Dark Knight Returns. Now he has a robotic arm. And then we have Luthor. And Luthor is like the rich billionaire that is actually controlling things on the side, because we find out that the president is not Ronald Reagan anymore. Ronald Reagan was the doofus president in Dark Knight Returns, but now we have an AI president. How, like, in today's era, not to get political, but we have a billionaire working behind a figurehead president. I feel like this is very similar to what the headlines will say today. But also the fact that we have an AI president, like, that's not too far removed. I can see us getting there, unfortunately, in like 20 years where the public just accepts having an AI president.
It was fun to read because I just read earlier this week the first Transmetropolitan Absolute for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
And oh my God, the politics in that book, or the political figures in that book, were so like accurate to what things were, but also where things are going. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, Warren Ellis did a great job as far as like having his finger on the pulse of like the political spectrum back then, but also exactly what you said, like where it's going.
Yeah.
So now we have this AI president, which I think is hilarious in this comic. That like, we had this glitch where people find out that he's not a real president, not a real person. But they'll say in the story that his like approval rating is still high. So it's like, no matter how awful or how dumb or how fake the president actually is, people still follow him. Which again, we're seeing that today. Not to get political, but we'll see that today. Now on the other side, so we have Batman's team with Catgirl and Green Arrow and the Bat Boys. In the middle, we have Luthor, the billionaire, behind the scenes of the AI president. And on the other side of things, we have Captain Marvel, Superman, and Wonder Woman working for the president. They're forced to work with the government. Like, this is a fun story. Like, we have like this crazy rogue team of superheroes with Batman and his gang. We have Luthor really running things behind the scenes of the U.S. government, world government.
I can't ever see a political climate where billionaires are influencing American politics.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's just like ripped out of the headlines of 2025. Frank Miller was
two quick comments though. The art is so rough, not used to old art like that, even though I'm a 90s kid. But it's also funny because to Falling Apart, he's saying the art is so rough and old, but you're saying that this is so new for the time and expressionistic for the time. So it's funny, the dichotomy there. And then Tyler saying, surprised Jake has had the stream going for an hour considering he hates this book. I won't spoil anything, but I was not as harsh this read through as I was last time. Reading in a vacuum after I've read a lot more of Miller's work was definitely a different experience, but also like, it's so boring living in an echo chamber and only doing streams with people who like the same books. Like, if I do a stream with Taylor, there's a way higher chance that he's going to recommend some Clay Pot comic I never would have heard by anybody else that I buy and I love. Doing streams with people with different tastes and different opinions is how you grow as a person.
Absolutely. I mean, that's how I love people talking to people with open minds about things, and you're one of them. And like, it's one thing I always talk about. Jess Bragg, Omnidog. One thing I appreciate about him is that he is one of the elder statesmen of the comic book YouTube community, but he is not the elder statesman of comics where it's like, nah, they don't make comics like they used to. Like he fully embraces modern comics from all gamuts, and I love that about him.
Once you go up to the 90s and then past it, I feel like he doesn't like the 90s era much. He calls himself a 90s comic survivor.
Yeah, which I mean that's fine too, but like he's not like Neil Adams or bust, you know.
Yeah.
So now we get into the influencers. These are the super chicks. Like, tell me this is not like what we see on Instagram, TikTok right now, like having cosplay influencers or having like.
That was like the one thing that I felt today. I am a social media manager. I am a content creator. I am on social media a lot, but the change I saw when TikTok had its temporary shutdown to like, I would always use YouTube TikTok, but then I stopped using it. I didn't watch shorts or like short form content for a long time. I recently downloaded Instagram Reels, and oh my God, the things I'm seeing are cursed and so overstimulating and so loud and so in your face that I got that same vibe a little bit. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Like that. This is something that I feel like he, because this came out before Twitter. This came out before Facebook. I don't think MySpace even existed at this time. But so social media was not a thing, but he like totally nailed exactly where we are in today's climate, even to the point where you read on the bottom of it and it says like chat live with Batchick at superchicksrule.com. Like that's totally like a Twitter handle almost, or a TikTok, you know.
Do you think all three of them would have an OPB affiliate code?
I think they would probably have an OF affiliate code.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But these are the super
chicks. And on that note, if you're buying 2 books, I'm just kidding.
But these are the super chicks. I think this was very much a commentary on the Dixie Chicks back in the day, or which I guess they're now called the Chicks.
Was this post the Dixie Chicks getting political? Because I remember that was a big thing.
That's what this is commentating on, I think, because these are the super chicks. That was that. And I remember that time. Like that was in high school, I think, when that happened, where the Dixie Chicks, again, now they're called the Chicks, came out and spoke against George Bush in the war in Iraq. And they were canceled. Like this was the first time I saw a celebrity get truly canceled. If you don't want to count like OJ, obviously, but like someone get canceled for something they said.
What did OJ do?
Just some terrible.
I'm just kidding, bro.
I know.
The book is conceptually amazing, and then yes, boobs. So the juxtaposition of comic book readers right there.
But they were completely canceled because of what they said. They're speaking out against a president, speaking out against war, and that was
especially they were country music, which is very much the side of George Bush. I feel like politically.
Absolutely. And this is coming out of 9/11 where everybody's like pro-America. Like in my lifetime, the most 100% patriotic our country's ever been is coming out of 9/11. But the war in Iraq was when it started to like crumble a little bit, where people were like, I don't know about this one. I don't think this war is necessary. But the chicks were the first people to speak out about, the first like celebrities to speak out against it. Again, they were canceled off the face of the earth. But this is commentating on that. And the end of issue 1. So again, we have the whole setup of his team, where Superman, Wonder Woman, Captain Marvel stand, where Luthor and the President, blah blah blah. The end of issue 1, we have Batman, like a badass with his kryptonite gloves, beating down Superman, right? Like totally just that was a juxtaposition. Totally just beating the crap out of Superman.
I didn't mind it. I can't wait to see it again.
We'll get there. Totally, I think this was kind of Frank Miller's commentary on how people viewed Dark Knight Returns. He's like, you want more of this? Like the kind of aspect of Dark Knight Returns was we finally saw Superman and Batman fight, and Batman won the fight, you know, so to speak.
Yeah.
So you want more of this? Well, here you go. Here's this to the nth degree. Let's push it even further, and you get that. But obviously, that's the end of issue 1. Now, with issue 2, we start off with superhero chic. How far will it go? So now superheroes are popular within this universe, right? This is kind of how I feel again, where the 90s went. So Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen happened in 86, 87. Those still weren't the best.
Wait, sorry, comics. Alexander, if you're in the chat, stop watching this portion until we tell you to start watching again. I feel like you're a little too. I'm just kidding.
Oh,
he's 13, so maybe he's a little young for this panel.
I could go to the next panel. Oh, well, that's not.
No, chat. Should he go back to the previous panel? Chat, let us know.
But again, so superheroes, so Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen were not the best-selling comics of all time, because we didn't get that until the 90s when Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and Todd McFarlane came out with X-Men 1, X-Force 1, and Spider-Man 1. Those were the best-selling comics ever. So it's like that was superheroes being popular. And also maybe a little bit predating superhero chic if we go to like superhero movies and how big those became after Dark Knight
Yeah.
Strikes Again. So a little bit of commentary on that, I feel like. News of the Nude I thought was hilarious. We kind of got this like, it was kind of a Howard Stern thing from back in the day, but also like nobody pays attention to the news in this world, so they have to like.
Which is funny because I feel like Returns was all about the news.
Yeah, so now nobody's paying attention to the news because again, 3 years removed, we have no Batman for 3 years, we have no Bruce Wayne's dead for 3 years.
We know why Jake bought the absolute edition of the book now.
But that's what they have to do. So this is the opening sequence of issue 2, and this is where the plane flies into the building. I just wanted to put
my wallpaper.
I just wanted to put this in here just to show like this is where we're at as far as where the 9/11 aspect comes, because then Frank Miller, who didn't grow up in New York, but is very much a New Yorker, like he loves the city. He talks about how 9/11 affected him truly in a like a visceral way. So he has like this love-hate relationship with New York. He talks about how he used to get mugged, and that kind of like turned him sour on humanity and people, but also 9/11 happened and it really affected him in a emotional way. Then we also see Batman or Superman and Wonder Woman consummate their relationship. We'll see that this is the second child that they're about to embark on here. We don't meet the second child until Master Race. That's when we meet the Golden Child. But this is the first time that we see them.
Dude, one of the things that I felt like I noticed in this one is how classic is the coloration and the logo on Superman's outfit. You know what I mean? Like that feels so timeless to me. Like,
oh, for sure. It also kind of shows you have a reverence, or that how much Frank Miller has a reverence for Superman, which was like the long commentary coming out of Dark Knight Returns was that like, oh, Frank Miller loves Batman, but he hates Superman, which I think he redeems that if you read all the way through Master Race.
I felt like for me, someone Discord chatted me that was reading it today said, wow, Frank Miller really hates Superman. And I got it more as like, I think one of the things that I've learned to do more is read more things as a meta commentary. And I felt more like Frank Miller was upset at Americans for not doing more to fight against the Patriot Act and like the nanny state that we became. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like Superman at its core has the power to stop and change and fix things in the same way that the American population does, but they were choosing not to.
Yeah, if you go back to where is he? The way Superman looks, I guess this is not the best picture, but I feel like Superman in this comic looks kind of like the way he portrayed Ronald Reagan in Dark Knight Returns. It's almost like Superman becomes that figurehead of the United States a little bit. Obviously, you have Luthor and the AI president, but I feel like that's kind of Superman's place in this story. It's kind of the Ronald Reagan patriotic character. So now we're going to see the Joker in all of his different costumes that he wears. We get like, Legion of Superheroes reference here. He kills the Guardian, Jack Kirby character in the back. He's dressed up like Mixelplick. I don't know how to say the character's name.
Mixelpidlick.
There we go. In this one, he's killing the Creeper, which is a Steve Ditko character. But also look at his feet there. It looks a little Spider-Man-ish.
Whoa. Okay, so this is blowing my mind. I've read the story multiple times and I never got those references.
Yeah, so this is the Creeper, Steve Ditko character.
So was this like a critique of younger heroes, or like what do you think this character was supposed to be a critique of?
I think he's just killing off like the Silver Age, Bronze Age era characters. And also I think Frank Miller's having a little bit of fun because he's a big Ditko fan. So you'll see this, you'll see later in the story Hawk and Dove make an appearance.
They look like they're from San Francisco in this book, I feel like.
What's that?
I feel like Hawk and Dove look like they're from San Francisco in this book.
A little bit, yeah. Then we get this giant, alien monster that comes in and attacks, and Batman thinks this is.
I hate that's the blurry pixelation on the eyes.
Oh yeah.
We got a ton of comments. Let me hit a couple of them.
Oh yeah,
logo is Max Fleischer Superman. Yes, exactly. Super timeless. Got a 3-parter. I know I'm in the extreme minority, but even though I love most Batman, I have never liked Returns or Strikes Again. The art, the story, the aggressive, excessive, in-your-face, intentional shock value. I felt trolled by him as I read, almost like he was telling two stories on the surface, and all the while subliminally tearing down Batman I loved. But Taylor, I love this presentation. Seeing the parts and the whole and the micro and the macro, even though they don't change my opinion, do make me appreciate more what it is and where it comes from. So thank you.
That's
Which I
amazing.
think is exactly what you wanted. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is all I want to Matt. And I'm not here to change opinions, but I'm here to maybe enlighten people to like look at things in a different way.
Yeah.
Maybe open their mind to things in a different way.
And then next Imaginaut. So let me dust off my speaking because there's gonna be some big words in this one, I bet. Running off to a screening of Bergman's Summer with Monica, 1952. Thank you both again, host and The Brave and the Boys. Though not at all necessary, I recommend watching all of Jodorowsky's films preceding the Incal and Dune doc before starting the Incal. That's a lot. All that will help enormously in contextualizing why he conceived that comic and the entire universe spun. Cool. Back to Brainiac Frog with the pixelized eyes.
Alejandro Jodorowsky is one of my favorite comic book writers of all time. Definitely writes a fever dream of things. Real quickly though, I don't know if you knew the Incal was spun out of Dune.
I knew it was related to the Fifth Element in some way, or that like there was. Is that
Fifth
related?
Fifth Element stole a lot of ideas from the Incal.
Okay.
And Mobius, the artist, did work on Fifth Element storyboards. But just real quickly, Jodorowsky worked on the original Dune movie. Like it was going to be the original Dune movie. It never came to be. But it had like crazy ideas. Like Pink Floyd was in the music.
That's the one that was never made, but there's a documentary about how crazy it was going to be, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I like Dune. I'm a big Dune fan. I've read the books, and well, not all the books, but some of the books, and I
highly recommend watching the documentary because it's just an amazing like it was going to be Star Wars before Star Wars. Star Wars didn't exist yet, but it was going to be this huge like sci-fi project, and but it never got made. So then they pulled ideas of that to make Incal in the Meta Barons universe.
Got it. Okay.
So I don't think all that. I think you will be more enlightened watching all that, but I don't think you need to watch all those movies and watch the documentary beforehand. But if you become
all before I'm allowed to read Ronin, right?
Yes, you have to watch all.
Joking aside, I have worked super hard to break free of something I call the beginner trap of encyclopedia reading. I did a giant Daredevil read through all of January where you were reading Frank Miller. I was reading every Daredevil run. And you know what I did purposely? I read it out of order. Oh, because that was so good and so refreshing and so amazing. And I loved it. I went Zdarsky to Wade to Soul to Miller Companion to Knights. And
that's such a freeing feeling, isn't it?
So freeing, dude.
I actually that's amazing because over just the last few years I started embracing things, reading superheroes like that. Like I love reading like taking 1 year and reading like all Flash, but I don't do it in order. I pick and choose like different eras and read it out of order because I kind of equate it to like when you meet someone really interesting in your life and they come into your life. They're not going to tell you like, okay, so I was born on this day, and then when I was 1, I did this, and when I was 2, no, like you're picking like they're like, oh, when I was 35, I did this, and then when I was 15, I did this, and then like you're not getting in an order, you're getting all this, and then you're piecing it together as you get to know the person.
I felt like it helped with burnout because it didn't feel like it felt like I was on several different anecdotal stories versus a giant marathon that felt like it was impossible to complete. And it was also cool because I was able to I made backwards connections, which I felt like was super fun, where I was like, oh, like, it is almost like I heard the punchline and then later would hear the joke, but it still worked. And that was because that was my biggest problem. Like I've done reading lists, which sometimes are important. Even today, there's an earlier chat where someone said, what reading order would you read Frank Miller's Batman in? And part of me feels like that's missing the point, you know what I mean? So
yeah, and I absolutely think it would be fun, like I said, with the omnibus idea to read it all in order, but I think that's like a different reading experience than to just pick and choose too. Like I think you could read it in both context and pull different
it was
things.
fun to go back and forth and be like, what should I read next? And not feel like there was only one path I had to go down.
Right. I think you'd pull different things, reading it in different ways. It's almost like doing a math problem and then reverse engineering it in a different way too. And like you're still coming to the same answer, but like you're doing it in different ways.
Yeah. And I'm glad that I finally feel free because it's such a trap to feel like, okay, I want to read Final Crisis by Grant Morrison. So let me start by reading all of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then Infinite Crisis, and then Identity Crisis, and then 50, all these, like, you get all of Batman, all just, you know what I mean? You can just, it's my first comic ever was Final Crisis, and I loved it. You know what I mean? It's okay not to know everything. Maybe I missed some references, but I also picked up on others that I wouldn't have, and that was really fun for me.
And it's hard with these connected universes to not get like trapped in those things too.
Yeah.
Like I'll be reading like one of the big characters I'm reading right now is Cable from X-Men. And like I'll read a story with
is that a real or fake X-Men?
Oh, it's a real one.
I'm just kidding.
He's the coolest one. But you'll read like a story with him in like Deadpool, for instance. You're like, oh, but now I kind of want to bleed off into this Deadpool series. But like,
yeah.
Anyways, great topic though. I love that topic. So we get Brainiac's involved now with Luthor helping out, and then we meet this.
I'm almost surprised that Brainiac Robot Frog doesn't also have the same green chucks on.
That'd be amazing. Like robotic chucks, like
Godzilla Frog Brainiac got busy.
Oh, what great callback! I'm gonna draw that picture now.
Okay.
Laura. So now we meet Lara, the first child of Superman and Wonder Woman. So we saw them.
Do you feel like that name's a little bit too close to multiple of Superman's exes?
You got to keep the L thing going on, though, right?
It's not like Lois is the mom.
Well, it's true. I guess. How does Wonder Woman feel about him naming it? Yeah, it's true. But he doesn't have the L thing going on, so you got to keep that going.
I love all these jokes. Cable got killed by streaming. He got unplugged. Alex, who I feel like you need to do a show with Alex someday. You guys have a lot of the same tastes. It also makes things more intriguing when they mention a previous thing that happened and you get interested in reading what they passed more.
Oh, for sure. Like that kind of is the fun thing about comics too, especially Big Two comics, is when you.
Okay, I'm getting a reference now. Is this a reference to Ronin with all these wires and cables and everything?
Very much so. I think it's like this cyberpunk kind of look to it, right? But this is like the city of Kandor, which becomes a huge part of what Master. Have you read Master Race?
I haven't.
Okay, I would recommend it. Coming off of Strikes, since you just read Dark Knight Strikes Again, maybe jump into Master Race.
I've just looked at some of the variant covers for a really long time.
I think it's a really fun story, and I think it's more tame than this.
Was he reined in a little bit more?
Reined in, that's a good way to say it. Because Brian Azzarello is the scripter in story, and Frank Miller is just kind of helping facilitate the story.
Can I ask a question? So we've mentioned before about the George Lucas thing. So let's use George Lucas as an example. When you have this amazing creator that pushes the boundaries really far, do you feel like it's better to have them be surrounded by yes men or have free reign to make something that isn't perfect but pushes things forward? Or is it better when there's someone that's able to rein them in a little bit and say, hey, maybe that's a bridge too far? Or I heard that the original cut of Star Wars was terrible and it was saved in the editing floor. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So do you think it's better for these crazy geniuses to be completely free to do whatever they want, even though it's going to be imperfect? Or do you think it's better to have someone to say, hey, maybe that's not the right call? You know what I mean? To have an editor or something.
I think editors are super important. How effective they are and I think it's up to the artist to allow criticism, at least from one person, and that being their editor, to let them rein in some of these things. I don't know that, because Bob Schreck is the guy that edited Frank Miller a lot of his works. Dark Knight Strikes Again, he's the editor on, and then any work that came after that, I think he's the editor on Frank Miller's work. I don't know that he's the best. I don't think he reins in Frank Miller at all. It doesn't seem like he does at all. If he does, I want to see the crazy stuff that got cut off of the, off of this stuff. Like what crazy ideas did Bob Schreck say? Like, oh, okay, that's too far.
And then my other question is, do you think there would have been, how much do you think 9/11 changed issue 3 from what it was originally supposed to be?
I think dramatically. And I think the biggest thing is that Batman and the Bat Boys and that gang, they were almost, I can't remember if they used the word terrorist, but they're depicted as almost terrorists, like this anti-government, like they're going to dismantle the government. And obviously I think that's where Frank Miller's mindset was with the government at that time.
Yeah.
And then 9/11 happens, and then you see like this dramatic shift in these characters where they're like, okay, maybe they're not terrorists and they're not dismantling government. Maybe they're trying to resurrect and reconstruct the government, like kind of thing. Like I think there's a dramatic shift in that. As far as like the conclusion to the story, I don't know if that changes. I think just like maybe the characterizations of some of the characters change.
Yeah. To highlight this comment, hey guys, sorry, this is a dumb question. No dumb questions, but how does this game work? If you're talking about the giveaway, comment hashtag cut the mustard, all one word, and you'll be entered to win Dark Knight Strikes Again in absolute format. If you're talking about the game of trying to rational if Strikes Again is a good or bad comic, you just sit down and let Taylor take you on a journey.
And then you decide for yourself.
Yeah.
But so the city of Kandor is an important role in Master Race, is what I was going to say, which I won't spoil anything for you, but it was an important part. And then we get to the point where Luthor is here beating the crap out of Batman. We saw this gigantic picture of Luthor, Lex Luthor already, right?
Yeah.
And then we get the son of Hawkman and Hawkgirl killing Luthor. And then here we get to the biggest twist of the story. Robin. And who is the Joker?
Yep.
Because the Joker we saw in Dark Knight Returns didn't make it, right? He was killed.
Yeah.
So how is this Joker running around in these different outfits? Well, it's none other than Dick Grayson, who's now wearing the Robin costume. What a twist!
This is like the third time they've asked. I want to highlight their question really fast.
Oh,
I think you should read some of it digitally. There's a main story, but it's a lot of side spin-off stories. Some of them were better than others. My favorite was the Joker night terror of working in the cubicle where Batman doesn't exist and he's just really bored and unsatisfied with life. But it's like 70 issues. Not all of them are good, but trust me, read some digitally first before you pull the trigger. Okay, sorry.
No, you're fine. So it's like, what a twist. Did you ever watch Robot Chicken?
Yes.
This is like a
you know what? I gotta be honest. I have never, this is the difference in our ages, I feel like. I have never sat down and watched Robot Chicken on television or streamed a full episode, but I have seen it on YouTube, like clips on YouTube. So I feel like I've seen a majority of the show just in brief 30-second clips on YouTube.
Okay. The episodes were only like 13 minutes long too. I soaked up that show. That was my favorite show in high school. I even made my senior project. We had to do like senior projects for like, what kind of career do you want to do? And all throughout English class senior year, you're just working on this one project. And mine was actually to make a stop motion movie that was like Robot Chicken inspired.
Have you seen Parks and Rec?
Some episodes. I haven't watched.
I'm gonna send you the clip of when he gets like fired and he's depressed and he tries to make a claymation movie and it's like 2 seconds long and he's like, I was working on that for 3 months.
I love stop motion, so that would be funny.
I was watching Kubo last week with my wife. She had never seen Kubo and the Two Strings, which I'm assuming you've seen, right?
Yeah.
And then I showed her a documentary afterwards of how it's all like all the stuff that they do. It blows my mind, man.
Oh, it's insane. Like I watched the one that really opened my eyes before all this project started was in high school. I watched the behind the scenes of Nightmare Before Christmas. And it's been a whole week making 1 minute of that film. And I was like, that's insane. Like a week's worth of work and you get 1 minute out of it.
That's how I felt like when I was a YouTuber that made shorts.
Yeah, hey, I don't disagree with that. It's a tough business there. So now we get Dick Grayson as Robin or as Joker. So it's like people that like love the Robin character, love Batman are probably like, what the hell? Like Frank Miller's lost his mind. How do we arrive at this conclusion? Well, let's go back to All-Star Batman and Robin. When Batman treats Dick Grayson this way, is it too far to imagine him going this nut, like this crazy, right? You make him live off of rats. You treat him like a psychopath does in All-Star Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
And you turn him into this. That was kind of a fun conclusion that obviously in All-Star Batman and Robin was made after the fact, but like I think it was Frank Miller putting the pieces together. I think the reason why we see Batman act the way he does in that book and treat Dick Grayson the way he does in that book is because this was the conclusion that Frank Miller had already written. So like, how do you get to this point?
Did you include my favorite panel in All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder where Green Lantern's going to like, he's like, yo, you kidnapped this child. So they paint everything yellow and they have like a glass of lemonade. And it's so hilarious. Like it is probably the funniest thing I think I've ever seen in any comic book ever. Just like Robin, like pouring a glass of lemonade, but like trying to be a good helper.
It's that absurdity that Frank Miller's best at. That you either love it or hate it. And then this is our concluding panel of the story. I was sentimental back when I was old. I just love that panel. But that's it.
Grizzly, bro.
That's the my presentation.
Let's hit with next Imaginauts comment. I will also just post on my way out that I think Dark Knight 2 is one of the most criminally misunderstood and maligned comics ever. And ironically, in several of the key ways that Dark Knight Returns was by its detractors upon its initial release. It was just too challengingly and audaciously subversive, too go for broke, lopsided, overtly racist, experimental, to revisionistically insider baseball, and too cynically all too present for most to wrap their heads around and accept, and especially among reactionary superhero comic fans whom either never understood or recognized Miller's revisionary superhero comic discursive project beginning with Dark Knight Returns in the first place.
Next Imaginaut, you could have just saved me 2 hours by just saying that to begin with. No, I agree with it. Everything you said. Absolutely. And I think one of my major points, and I think you've asked me this question before in a private chat, but like, I appreciate artists, whether it be music, movies, comics, whatever, that will step up to the plate and swing for the fences and maybe strike out more so than I would someone just safely walking up to the plate and trying to hit a single or bunt. Those are your monthly guys that are just, like your Brian Michael Bendis.
Status quo, the ones that don't challenge anything.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, like right now I'm reading Bendis's Avengers, and like every issue is like, it's like fun, it's safe, it's like, it's like candy or whatever.
A lot of Bendis talk in it though.
Yeah, a fair amount, but there's nothing wrong with them. But there's your monthly Marvel big two comics. But Frank Miller, like I love these guys that will walk up to the plate and swing for the fences, whether or not they make it or not. Like, I want to see something interesting, something that's challenging, something that it makes you think like, wow, this is different, this is interesting. Those are the kind of comics I gravitate towards. Which, I mean, I'm not saying that's the right way to do it either, but that's just where my mindset is at, and where I arrive at the conclusions that I like Dark Knight Strikes Again.
Yeah, and I can appreciate the historical context of Dark Knight Strikes Out. Just kidding. I will say that reading it today in a vacuum with a better understanding of meta commentary and satire, I didn't hate the writing anywhere close to as much as I did originally coming off of Returns. What I will say though is that the art, and when I say art, I want to clarify what I mean. I mean everything you see in the panels. So like the pencils, the coloring, the plotting of the art, which I know is a writing thing but I would just say the overall presentation is super overstimulating for me, super confusing, super convoluted, and I totally get the historical context, but I feel like it's like, I don't know. I mean, it almost feels like did you ever see like the Matrix 5, where like they were going to make a Matrix 5 and they got the Wachowski sisters to direct it, and the whole movie is like a big meta commentary FU to the fact that there'd be like another Matrix reboot, you know what I mean? Like a Freddy got fingered thing. And it almost feels like, yeah.
Some people view Dark Knight Strikes Again as that. People think that Frank Miller was saying like, F you, I don't want to make another Batman comic. You keep asking me to make another Batman comic, so here you go. Here's my Batman comic. Yeah, and it's like a pile of shit that people think that Frank Miller did that on purpose or something. Yeah. Which, I mean,
how do you feel about that? Like, do you feel?
I don't. I think Frank Miller as an artist has more respect for himself than to deliver a pile of shit for the sake of delivering a pile of shit. I think there might have been some middle finger sticking up to like certain aspects of what people viewed as Dark Knight Returns or what people expected from a sequel. But I don't think inherently he was like, I'm going to make the crappiest Batman comic I can, so you stop asking me to make Batman comics. Because if he did that, then we wouldn't get All-Star Batman and Robin. We wouldn't get Master Race or Golden Child. That would have been his
format
last.
Did you get Batman and Robin in?
I'm going to get the Absolute eventually. I don't own it yet, but
I think it's getting clearance out on Hamilton. It's like $40. I would do that before it's out of print. Because
I know. I
but
need
it's
to.
like I have to say that like, how do you think Strikes Again would have been if you had an artist like Jim Lee, for instance? If Frank Miller just did the story, do you think it would be better? Do you think it needs to have Frank Miller, or like, do you think the art needs to be the way it is to tell the story, or do you think that like his writing and like the stuff he was trying to say might have been more like easier to swallow if the art was a little safer?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I think you might enjoy Master Race is because Andy Kubert does most of the art.
Oh my God. Up in the Sky's my favorite book.
Yeah, so each issue does end with a backup strip, and Frank Miller does some of the art on those, or most of the art on the backup strips. But Andy Kubert does most of the art, and he kind of does like try to do his Frank Miller style to it. But I think it's more palatable for what you would expect, or what you might enjoy. But I think I prefer it to be Frank Miller. I mean, I want to see Frank Miller's full vision. My clay pot comics that I love comics when they're done by one hand. I think having cohesiveness of the same writer and artist, or the writer doing the artwork, I think there's like a cohesiveness that they you can't get from, if you have a separate writer and artist. Now there's obviously magical stories that are done with a different writer and artist, like Watchmen or whatever. But I think things that, especially when we're talking big two comics, things that make like Frank Miller's Daredevil or John Byrne's Fantastic Four or I'm drawing a blank. Simonson's Thor, like having that same writer and artist on the same book, I think is kind of a fascinating thing. And even down further into independent comics, when you have someone doing everything by one hand,
Like Bang the Ballad of the Tiger by our friend Josh Greathouse.
absolutely. Or even, I mean, we've seen that in big two comics recently too, like Ed Piskor and Jim Rugg and Tom Scioli did their grand design projects with Marvel, where they did everything. They did the lettering, coloring, inks, pencils, writing. Those are my favorite kind of projects.
Do you think the coloring detracts from it? And I guess my other point would be, what would you say its biggest flaw or its biggest sin was? Like, if you were to, as someone who likes it, where do you think it missed the ball the most?
Definitely the coloring. Like I said, I almost wish it was released as a black and white comic. Now
Have you read the Noir edition?
Yes, I did. So in January, I read it in preparation for this because that's one of the points I wanted to make. I was literally reading the Noir edition on my iPad next to my Absolute edition and comparing page by page. So it's like reading the Noir edition and then looking over to see what the art was different.
I wonder what the experience would be like reading the regular edition, but turning your iPad into black and white, so you still got the background images and everything but you saw it without the color.
I've never actually done that before. That's the first I've ever heard of it doing, is when you mentioned that with Nightwing.
Yeah.
I might try that actually, because you do lose things. Like I showed you in the artwork, like some of the things that Lynn Varley literally drew in color, you lose. So if it was
that lazy of Frank to do that, or was he just letting
no,
Varley
that's
be
like
the artist that they wanted to be?
That's something we see in modern comics now, is where the colorist does have a heavier hand as far as.
I thought modern colorists only use brown.
Well, I mean, the bad ones do. The bad ones do.
We got Alex saying, from a superhero comic standpoint, the heroes' relationships were very fun. Plastic and Elongated Man. And Alex really liked how Batman was like terrified of Plastic Man. He'd kill us all. Green Arrow, The Question, Wonder Man, Superman, they all felt established.
Yeah, and that's one thing too, is like, I think this comic would have done better if it was called like Justice League Strikes Again or something like that, because it very much is a Justice League story. Like you see the whole full cast. I don't think DC would have gone with that though.
Batman's not even he is in the book a lot, but also like a lot of it is like Catgirl's story, I feel like, or like Batman's like city, you know what I mean? Like Batman's not the central character for big portions of the book, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Miller has been on record saying that his whole Batman story is a Carrie Kelly story. It's not about Batman, it's about Carrie Kelly. I think that's the character. I don't think that's his original intention. I think he created the Carrie Kelly character in Dark Knight Returns and fell in love with the character, and then wanted to explore that one more. Especially because when you get into Master Race and you get into Golden Child, the Carrie Kelly character very much becomes like even a bigger.
So my question is, if a lot of the Frank Miller Batman is him looking at deconstructing Batman or showing the absurdity of Batman in an exaggerated way, what do you think makes the character like? Is it just like, what does he like about Carrie Kelly so much that he thinks is a better character or like a better hero or a better figure to that should be respected?
I don't know. That's a great question. I think it's kind of like his view. I think he thinks that like Batman is maybe like the first vigilante character in the universe that's like he's like psychopath and a fascist. But then I think Carrie Kelly's more of the reined in, humanized character that maybe will think about things rather than right and wrong. Will think about like the consequences of things more than Batman does.
Yeah, like I liked when she was reviewing with the Bat Boys or whatever you want to call them, like their previous interactions, and like I felt like she was like being like, yo, you shouldn't have hurt that person, you shouldn't have hurt that person, you could have done this instead. And like even when she's like fighting, she's like, okay, let me just break their jaw, that'll be a quick fix. Like
Mhm.
she I think she shows a level of compassion
Yeah,
that Batman never shows throughout the entire book.
absolutely. And I think that's part of, and I think that's more probably in line with what people view as Batman. I think as a whole, I know I said Batman's a psycho fascist or whatever, but I think as a whole, I think the interesting thing that makes Batman so great is that I view him as more of like an iconic legend in like the by definition and purest form of those words is like I think it's more fun to think of him as all these different interpretations. It's almost like
Yeah.
those scenes in Spider-Man, like the first Sam Raimi movie, when they start asking like the pedestrians, the civilians, like who Spider-Man is, or like they encountered him, they're like, I saw him and he has those giant wings, and so another
Yeah.
person's like, I saw him and he has 8 arms, and another person says like, oh, he's so cute or whatever. Like it's almost like
That yeah.
all these different interactions in ways that people within Gotham see Batman and their short little interactions with him and how they view him. It's kind of how I feel like all the different writers and artists and their interpretations of the character.
So I got two things to say for that. One, have you seen the animated movies? Is it Legends of the Bat? Where it's literally that, where it's like 3 kids or 4 kids are all telling their Batman story, and each
Oh no,
one's a different animation style. Let me pull it up. Let me see. Is it Legends?
is that a recent movie?
Oh, Gotham. I think it's Gotham.
Gotham Knights.
Gotham Knights. Yeah. Have you seen that animated movie?
Oh yeah, that's the one that came out before around the same time as Batman Begins, I think.
Yeah, Batman Gotham Knight. So
I have seen that one.
Set between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, the film depicts it's an anthology of 6 segments produced by Japanese animation studios, but it's all about them explaining like their story of when Batman was there, but each one's a different animation style. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
also like
each kid views Batman in a completely different way.
Yeah, and we see projects like Batman Black and White. It was another similar thing where all these different cartoonists and writers did their own interpretation of Batman.
But then on a deeper level, I mean, we talked about Planetary earlier. There's the Planetary Batman crossover where you get to see every interpretation of Batman. And what I love about it, and I think Zdarsky did a similar thing in his first Batman trade, where Bruce meets all the other Batmans from all the different realities, is like the thing I feel like I feel like people struggle with the most when they're the hurdle or the prison that they need to break out of is that there's only one interpretation of these characters. These characters are mythic figures. It's like religion. You know, like these deities that have 1,000 interpretations, but like why, like how crazy is it that there's a Batman that has a spray that repels sharks that people love and adore, and then there's a Batman that beats people to a bloody pulp to the point where he's terrifying and people love that. Like I've never been like, oh, this new interpretation, the hashtag not my Batman or whatever. Like these characters should ebb and flow. The only way they're ever going to exist for another 100 years is if they change and if they grow. You know what I mean? So I definitely am not someone that's like, even though I'm more of a modern reader, I feel like I'm not someone that thinks like, oh, these like I think maybe it's easier as a modern reader because there's already been all these previous interpretations of the character versus being an older reader and not liking new interpretations. You know what I mean? So whenever someone's like upset about something like, oh, they aged up to Jonathan Kent or whatever, whenever they killed so-and-so, dude, it's comics. It's going to change. And in 10 years, there'll be another crisis and everything will start over. You know what I mean? So I guess like,
absolutely.
I like that.
Yeah, I do too. And I think, you're exactly right. I love all the different interpretations. I think it's weird when people are like, that character would never say that, or like they don't get the voice of the character. Like I understand what they mean by that. But
sometimes I feel like they're so reverent about a specific character. They're cool with other characters changing, or they're cool with other characters changing if it's out of continuity. But sometimes they're like, oh, well, it's just that one specific character that's so out of character for so and so. But it's like, see, but like you can't pick and choose. You can't cherry pick what's allowed to be interpreted in different ways and what has to be reverent. Like I don't know, you know what I mean? And
I'm not saying that it's wrong to say like that character would never say that, because there's totally different interpretations where writers like don't understand the character by any means, and it's just like completely, go off on their own thing. But also like you can make your own headcanon too. You just ignore certain parts and things.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Like that's the best part is when someone goes like, especially if it's a newer fan, which a lot of my channel is newer readers, they go, well, is this canon? Dude, I think personal canon is more important than any set continuity. You can create and pick and choose your own canon from any media that you love and any interpretation that you love. Like there's no reason where you should say, oh, I don't like that story is not important because it's not canon or it's not in continuity, And also DC is gonna say whatever makes the money's in continuity, you know what I mean? Something can be out of continuity and make enough money than it is in continuity.
In context of Frank Miller's Batman, like for the longest time it was Batman Year One's in continuity, which I think is still to this day is considered continuity or in canon. But Dark Knight Returns, like when it first came out, was like maybe this is like how Batman ends. Like it was considered like maybe it's in canon or not. I think now like it's out of canon officially, but like it was almost like for a while.
They teased it. Doesn't he show up in Zero Year or Zero Crisis Zero Hour?
I haven't read that one. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, Frank Miller Batman shows up in it. When they're going through like the different time, like potential time periods and things like that. Maybe
I need to read that then.
I can't believe you didn't even Taylor didn't do enough research. Just kidding. It's a brief 1-page cameo. But this is a good point. Should writers care about continuity? Personally, I think so, especially if it's coming right off someone else. I feel like if there's concurrent runs, the editors should care about continuity, but the writers should write the best story possible. And here's the thing, it's comics. If Nightwing gets shot in the Nightwing book, but then it's a better Batman story if Nightwing is there. If Nightwing shows up and he's got a bullet hole, I'm like, oh, nice little Easter egg. They cared. But also if Nightwing shows up, I don't think it, like if the story needs Nightwing and Nightwing's been shot, I think it's okay to use Nightwing.
Yeah, I think I always appreciate it when like a Jeff Johns or somebody will take things from like the Silver Age and reference them, or like Grant Morrison on his
Gaggy. I'm a Gaggy stan. I love whenever Gaggy shows up.
Or when Grant Morrison did their Batman run, and like they did this thing where like Batman, the Black Case book or whatever it's called, where like, which I wish that was in print. It's one of my biggest irks with DC and collecting Grant Morrison's Batman stuff is I wish that Black Case book was still in print.
Don't they give you like a page or two that kind of gives you what you need to know in the Omni?
But the Black Case book was like literally these 10 issues of stories from Batman is what Grant Morrison was referencing in their run of Batman. So it's like you get a kind of compilation of like these are the most important crazy wild Batman stories where he's fighting aliens or whatever it is that Grant Morrison's referencing that you need to know for Grant Morrison's run. And it's like this trade paperback that's like out of print. But like, I appreciate when they will reference those things. Now when Grant Morrison does that, I don't expect him to say, okay, so Batman Golden Age until now, everything did happen.
Yeah.
I feel like Grant Morrison could pick and choose whatever they want to do for these stories. But like it's so hard to expect them to keep a through line continuity from like the beginning to end.
So and that could limit the stories. I think continuity should be seasoning like that makes it better, or a little wink for fans that have read everything. But I feel like I don't know, like when they're like, oh, you like sometimes it works. Like I remember, like I really liked Secret Six, and you talk about how they were like, hey, create a villain team, and she goes, well, can I use this villain? No, you can't use any of those villains. You can't use any of those villains, and it forces her to pick the most obscure villains you've ever heard of and create something amazing. But other times it's like, I don't want every other writer to impact what could have been a better story just because something else had already happened. Because especially if I'm reading these things, maybe it's different if you're reading week to week single issues, But like, I'm reading these stories 10 years after the fact. I just want to read the best story possible.
Well, I mean, two notes on that. The Justice League International had a similar aspect because it was coming out of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and they're doing Justice League, but the editors were like, you can't use Superman, Wonder Woman, or Batman. Like, what that? We have to do a Justice League story without the Trinity? Like, what are you talking about? Finally, Denny O'Neil gave him Batman. But it was just but out of that came like this great run with all these obscure characters that I love. Another thing, more recently, Jonathan Hickman, rumor is that he had this giant run of X-Men that he was working on, and one of the biggest characters coming out of that was going to be Franklin Richards, and that was going to be like a big aspect that kind of shifted the gears of his run.
Is that a real or fake X-Men?
Franklin Richards, he's a Fantastic Four.
I know who he is.
But I guess Dan Slott, word is that Dan Slott, who was working on Fantastic Four at the time, said, no, you can't use Franklin Richards. So it like completely like veered off Hickman's vision for what he wanted to do with X-Men in a negative way, in my opinion. But which is such a silly thing. Like, because you're doing Fantastic Four, I can't use this character. Like, we can't work this out kind of thing. But
we have Alex saying, ignoring direct continuity because you want to write something different isn't always great in an established universe. Comic characters are like toys. You can play with them. You can change their looks or what they do, but the model should stay the same. If not, it's just a different toy.
I understand that works for like the corporate comics and capitalism of needing to keep the character rolling and things. I get all that. Like, I'm never going to argue like that's a bad choice. But personally, as a fan, I kind of wish these characters aged in real time. Like, I would love it to be like every generation and era has their own Spider-Man or their own Flash. Because you kind of had that with Flash a little bit. You have people say like, Wally West is my Flash or Barry Allen is my Flash. I wish that was kind of like all of Big Two Comics. And like we saw these characters age, and we saw Peter Parker mentoring the next Spider-Man. And
I also just feel like, well, how slow and gradual does the change need to be? If you go to Silver Age Marvel, the characters feel like the same characters in their grandest sense. But if you read Golden Age Superman or Silver Age Superman, those do not seem like the same guy as modern Superman. You know what I mean? So how much change would you say is allowed? I don't care. I feel like if they change Superman completely, I might just stop reading, but that doesn't mean I'm never going to read Superman again, because they should be able to change drastically, because they'll always change back to the status quo, but that status quo will still ebb and flow and evolve over time, I think.
Well, I think that's one of the things that's hurt the Spider-Man character, because Spider-Man started off as a teenager with all his issues and then eventually got married to Mary Jane. And that's kind of like the peak of his life, culminating in like, I finally married the supermodel, you know, whatever.
On the Brave and the Boys, we're actually a pro Paul channel.
But after that, it's like, where do you go with the character? Because then now they're not married, but now like over the last 20 years, it's been Spider-Man is doing what? It's like, let's see the character progress. Let's see him be a dad and be a husband and those things. But no, that we have to always have him be the single down on his luck character. How many different stories can you tell that with that kind of Spider-Man?
And I think, so here's my question then. Do you think things like Ultimate Spider-Man and the Absolute line are doing so well because people are excited that they're free of continuity? Or do you think they're doing so well because they're radically different and people are craving something different?
I think it's because it's an easier jumping on point. And I think the creators have more freedom because editors, like, I think Jonathan Hickman working on Ultimate Spider-Man is a huge indictment on the editorial office of Spider-Man and Marvel. I think the fact that you have Jonathan Hickman, one of the hottest writers in comics, I guarantee you, if he said he wanted to do the Amazing Spider-Man main continuity line, they would hand it over to him instantly. But now they'd have all this editorial interference that they've had. So the fact that he wants to work on Ultimate Spider-Man, the fact that we have Snyder comes back and wants to do Absolute Batman, he's working on that, right? Yeah.
So we have Snyder on Absolute Batman, and then Kelly Thompson on Absolute Wonder Woman, and then you have Aaron on Absolute Superman.
Yeah. So like, I don't want to like rain on anybody's parade. Everyone's excited about those runs and things, but I look at it, it's like, okay, like why can't they just inject that kind of excitement and interest into the main continuity? Like, why are we having to do these Elseworlds things to get people interested in these characters? It's all editorial interference is my only answer. And eventually these characters are not going to be new. Eventually it's going to be the same thing that happened with the Ultimate Universe, where they're like, okay, this is kind of run its course. Let's just merge it with the main continuity and move on. Like Absolute Batman, and Ultimate Spider-Man by Hickman, like these will be eventually merged into the main continuity or whatever. That's
Oh, you know, we're getting Crisis on Absolute Earth one time.
Absolutely, like 100%. That's where it's going to end, and that's going to happen when interest starts waning in those characters. When Absolute Batman stops being a hot title is when they're going to go to that movement to then get that event to be a hot event or whatever it is. But like, I just wish they would find ways to inject excitement into the main continuity and do it without having to renumber everything. Like, I'm totally in the Todd McFarlane school, who has a successful model of doing it, where he says, like, quit renumbering things, like find a way to advertise that issue number 257 is an exciting issue, you need to buy it, like, or have it. And if you're looking for jumping on points, say like, hey, starting with issue 257, do jumping on point if you want to be a new reader into the story, and advertise it as such.
Yeah,
you don't have to have everything
I
be
think
number one.
they're too scared of changing it too much and hurting the bottom line. You know what I mean? I feel like because it's a business, so like McDonald's can come out with a new crazy burger, but like people want the McDouble and the Big Mac that they're used to. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
it sucks. It sucks, but like I just wish that they would take better lessons from their successes. You know what I mean? And it's sometimes I feel like when there is something that's amazing, they take the wrong lesson from it. You know?
I think one of the biggest things too that the Big Two could do is find a new royalty program. I think since the days of Image Comics, that we have seen like a dearth of like new characters introduced. Like, who's been like the biggest name character of the last 20 years introduced to Marvel and DC? Like, there's not very many, especially when you compare it to like 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s Marvel, DC, when there is so many new characters happening. We haven't had that in the last 20 years. And the reason why is because of Image Comics are independent. These creators want to own the characters outright, which I don't blame them for. But we look at someone like Rob Liefeld, who cashed in big money and still making money off of it in the early 90s when he created Deadpool and Cable and all these characters. He looked in the royalty program and realized, if I create a character for Marvel right now, that's the way it works now, then it doesn't work like this anymore. If I create Deadpool, anytime Marvel uses Deadpool from here until I die and then it'll go to my kids, I get money from it. So if they make a Deadpool movie, Deadpool video game, Deadpool action figures, I'm making money from it. So he took that, and if you read those early Rob Liefeld Marvel comics, he's introducing like new characters every single page. Like, it's not just Deadpool Cable.
Is it the X-Force omnibus? I have that. Is that him?
Volume 1, X-Force Volume 1 is his first X-Force run. And it has like his latter New Mutants issues that bleed into that. But like, he's introducing there's like all kinds of new characters, Kane and Gideon, these characters that you probably have never heard of. But he's just like throwing all these things at the wall because he knew this royalty program and the way it worked, and it's paid off for him. So now, to incentivize creators today to want to create new characters for Marvel and DC because they need new characters, if you want to use it as a cynical approach and say like they need these comics to be written and created and new characters to be created so they can make movies out of them, whatever. But there's no incentive for creators to do that. There's no incentive to grab a Donny Cates and say, hey, make your coolest character for us that you can. He's going to say, no, I'll go to Image and make it with my imprint over there. So I think that's a big thing missing from Big Two Comics too. Like, so like, how to get around like this Absolute Batman thing, instead of putting that creative, imaginative energy into creating this character that's just like a derivative of Batman, maybe incentivize Scott Snyder to create a new character for, which I guess he did with the Batman Who Laughs or whatever, right?
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, we're gonna go down such a long tangent. Sometimes when they do create a new character, they just run it into the ground and milk it to the point. And then like other times too, though, I feel like my complaint, I love Tinian as a writer, but my complaint with Tinian's Batman run, which is getting an omnibus next week, which you can grab from Organic Price Books, I feel like he like overdid the shooing in new characters. It just felt like every new character, like he created like 6 new characters in one Batman run. And I feel like it just has to be organic. And a lot of times it's not. But speaking of organic, they were kind enough to give us a giveaway of Absolute Dark Knight Strikes Again. So you can read it for yourself. Guys, we have 8 people in the, entered. We have 18 watching. If any of y'all in the continental United States, go ahead and comment #CutTheMustard. and you'll be entered to win a absolute of Dark Knight Strikes Again. Should
This
we
beautiful
run
book.
Yeah. You could be like me and Taylor and have it.
It's beautifully designed.
How do you feel about absolutes with dust jackets? I'm anti it.
I'm anti dust jacket too. I don't understand why you have the dust jacket if you have a slipcase.
Yeah.
I do like that it's different art though. The ones that drive me nuts, dust jackets in general, which Dark Horse does this a lot, is when the dust jacket is exactly the same thing underneath the cover.
Oh, yeah.
Like trade dress
Why
and
even
everything. It's like, come on, can you not give me some new artwork?
Just come on, call up Chip Kidd like you taught me about, and he'll design something rad.
Put some thought into it. I almost want to just
Yeah.
throw those dust jackets away, but I know I won't be able to sell the book in the future if I do that. So
I feel that. I wish I was better at keeping the absolute leaflets when I first started collecting absolutes.
oh, I keep those too. I just throw them into the book.
Yeah.
Do you have any absolutes without ribbons?
Multiversity doesn't have a ribbon.
Because I know my Watchmen doesn't have a ribbon. So one of the printings of Watchmen didn't have ribbons.
Oh, interesting.
I think I don't know if the most recent one does, but this is like a second printing, I think.
I will say that if you're international, okay. I mean, maybe if you're international, I can just send you a gift card and then you can order something and deal with shipping on your own. Does that seem fair, Taylor?
That seems like it would work.
Okay. So if you're international, I can do a gift card and you can worry about shipping on your own, but I feel like it'll be cost prohibitive because we're a lot smaller of a business. We don't have like the same shipping rates as like Amazon and things like that. So if you're in the United States, go ahead and do #CutTheMustard. I think my wife got home. I need to get us some dinner. So this was fun, man. This was informative. I feel like this is one of the few live streams I'm going to rewatch and just try to enjoy it, you know? Like this was very good, man. I feel like I always learn so much when we do a stream together.
I appreciate that. I do plan on doing a edited down solo video essay kind of version of this on my own channel. So I'll probably rewatch it too to see like things that I wish I would have said or didn't say or whatever. My absolute Watchmen is the 8th printing, it says. That's insane. 8 printings.
Yeah. Guys, I don't know if it like will be cost prohibitive. There'll be customs and duties and that sort of stuff. So it might be best just to keep it constant in the United States. I want everyone to, I want to make sure that this is actually like a good prize for someone. I don't want someone to be stuck with a $50 gift card that actually hurts them.
Yeah.
So I'll give it like 60 more seconds and then we'll do the giveaway. I guess my last question would be rereading all of Frank Miller, Batman and all this stuff. Was there one thing that stood out to you the most on your big reread that you didn't pick up on before?
I think the humor would probably be the biggest thing. Is like, not that I missed it the first time, but like rereading these, there's so many, you can see that Frank Miller's just having fun writing these comics. And there's like a lot of jokes and stuff that like went over my head at first, or like, maybe I was just thinking of like the dark grittiness of it and didn't think about it. Cause I think it's the thing that people miss too, is like, they think it's supposed to be dark, gritty, and serious. And then when they see Dark Knight Strikes Again, it's like so garish and like loud and crazy that it's like, this isn't what I wanted. I'd say that was probably the biggest thing. But
you know what you need to add? I'm going to give you a book for your Frank Miller read through.
What's that?
Have you read Tom King's Rorschach?
I have.
Okay.
And that book,
I didn't get it, but I don't know how I feel about it. It wasn't the book. It just felt like it was all, and I'm excited, shameless plug when I talk to Tom next week, but I just felt like it was all these inside jokes in the industry of comic book writers, and I wasn't inside the joke. Like I didn't get the references, you know what I mean? But
I got most of them.
Yeah.
And I still don't know how I feel, because I felt like I read it and I was like, this definitely needs to be reread. I'll read it in a few years and see how I feel about it. I either loved it or it went over my, or not even went over my head, but just like was kind of like, okay, it's like wink, wink, nod. But the crazy thing is, which you could ask him about. I don't know if you want to look it up first, but Otto Binder did this crazy thing where he was trying to. Otto Binder was like the creator of Supergirl and the Legion of Superheroes, and he wrote a bunch of like pulp stories and sci-fi back in the day. Wrote a lot of Superman comics back in the Silver Age. But he had this crazy. He had a crazy tragic life and story where his daughter was killed in a car accident, and his wife, I think his wife died too, and he went into alcoholism. Really tragic stuff. But he has this real story where he sat down with a bunch of comic creators, and like it's in that Rorschach book where he sits around and like tries to speak to the dead through like a radio or whatever.
Mhm.
And it's Otto Bender. I think he replaced Otto Bender in the story with somebody else. He doesn't call him Otto Bender, but Frank Miller was one of the people that was in that room with him, with Otto Bender, trying to speak to the dead. And they all thought Otto Bender they're all kind of do it to appease Otto, because they thought like he kind of like lost his mind a little bit because all these tragic things happened to him. But it's a wild story. I read the biography of Otto Bender a couple years ago, and then I read, and it was like totally, coincidence that I then read Rorschach, and I'm like, holy crap, like he's referencing that crazy story.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of things like that.
Idea.
Like Steve Ditko's a character within the Rorschach comic, but he's not called Steve Ditko.
And I know that one was more tied to, because he created the question, right, and was like the moral absolutionist, black and white versus, which kind of ties into the Rorschach theme. So I got that one. I thought was it Frank Miller was a character who created a dark and gritty pirate, because in Watchmen, pirates are the comic books.
Right. Yeah.
And he created a dark interpretation of the character when the pirates should have just been for kids.
Right. Which is like kind of his Dark Knight Returns, right?
Yeah. So that was I got to reread it. I think like I almost feel like we need to do another one of these shows in a year where we do Rorschach. You give me a 2-hour-long presentation on the inside jokes of Rorschach. I do
think one of the things that I loved about the early issues of Dark Knight Strikes Again that never really panned out was his Question character. Question was pretty much like his interpretation of Rorschach, of Watchmen, because he was like that kind of character. And I almost thought it was leading to, every time I read it, I feel like it's leading to this, but it doesn't pay out this way. But I thought Jimmy Olsen was going to become the Question.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Because Jimmy Olsen is a journalist, and the Question is a journalist, right?
Yeah.
And like Jimmy Olsen's going nuts in the beginning of Dark Knight Strikes Again, and then the Question comes. I was like, every time I read it, I still think that like, oh, Jimmy Olsen's going to become the Question, but then it doesn't pay out that way, and I'm like, oh.
Why do did Frank Miller, besides the little tidbits we got in this book, did he ever write the Question? Because that would have been fucking rad.
I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of. I think his DC work is just Batman and Superman related.
Well,
besides like Ronin, obviously.
Yeah. Well, guys, that's the stream. Let us know in the chats either now or afterwards what you think. If you guys learned anything, give Taylor a huge round of applause for all his hard work. Go subscribe to him if you're not, and let's see who's winning a absolute of Dark Knight Strikes Again.
Who's gonna be falling apart?
Wasn't falling apart the one that doesn't want it? Like the one that was saying how bad he thought the art was and how bad he thought the story was. That's hilarious.
Maybe I changed his mind, and he's like, dang it, I really want that book.
Yeah. So falling congratulations. Comment down below how I can get a hold of you. I'm not sure if you're in the Discord or if you can message me on Facebook. But we'll get you set up. I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to thank Taylor again. Taylor, where can let me just remove this. Taylor, where? Also, falling apart. That was you that was saying you weren't a fan of the art, right? How do you feel now? Do you think it's going to be better or worse in the absolute size?
I hope that when he reads it, if this is his second time reading it, that he reads it with more open eyes, more enlightening eyes. Yeah. That's all I wanted out of this video. But you can follow me, Taylor Talks Comics, on all social media platforms. Search for me at Blue Sky, Twitter, all that jazz. YouTube, though, the most appreciative I would be is if you could subscribe to my channel, Taylor Talks Comics. I got a lot of video content coming out this week. I just got some more review copies for Fantagraphics out there, so check out for that. But yeah, please subscribe.
And I, as always, am Jake from the Brave and the Boys. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, we have a Discord. What I really love is that like our Discord engagement is growing to the point where we do like video game nights on Marvel Rivals. We do book clubs. It's been really, really fun to see the Discord community come together, and it's been awesome. So everyone, thanks so much. Keep reading and stay brave. Do you have an outro? I don't know if you have an outro.
Keep talking comics. That's what I said.
Keep talking comics. There we go. Bye, guys.